Hello, everybody. Welcome to the J.Gray Podcast. I'm really excited for the guest that I have on today. He's a good friend of mine. His name is Shaun. Welcome to the J.Gray Podcast, Shaun.
Glad to be here, Josh.
All right, man.
Super excited to be on.
People also know you as It's Zero Love on the social medias.
That's true.
Where does that name come from?
There's two backstories to the handle. Zero Love was originally my handle, and then it was taken most places, so I just added the It's. But Zero Love, I played tennis in high school, and me being a very emo high schooler, I found a lot of interesting dichotomy between the fact that in tennis, love and zero mean the same thing. Like when the score is 15 love, and I was like, oh, love means zero, so Zero Love was just kind of a way to like bring attention to that. I also had a crush on a girl, and her AIM name had started with zero. Her AIM handle had zero in it, so a little bit of that too. But I always say the tennis thing first because it's way less embarrassing.
Well, I appreciate the candid honesty because I remember having a crush on a girl or two, and I don't remember what their AIM names were, but I was the guy to be like, hey, hi, once every week, and they wouldn't respond. And then I grew out of that eventually.
I know that's when you put up the away message with the passive aggressive lyrics that are clearly about them. That was
or you ask a girl to prom and she goes, oh, I don't want to buy a dress. Sorry. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Anyways.
Well, listen, I didn't want to buy a dress either, but here I am.
Here we are. Here we are. I got no problem wearing a dress.
Yeah.
I've had to do it in theater before. It's very comfortable.
I went as Princess Zelda one year for Halloween.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. Actually, it was last year for Halloween. My partner, Kristen, who you know, she went as Link and I went as Zelda. Just hilarious. I had this gnarly, like extra big, like ZZ Top beard, so it was incredibly comical. Chest hair coming out of the top of. That's wild.
Definitely worth rescuing.
Yeah.
Definitely worth rescuing. Well, shout out to Kristen.
Yeah.
I miss you guys. We had commented when you came over today that I haven't seen you since February.
Yeah.
Because of this whole pandemic and just staying safe. It's nuts, man.
Yeah, it was a wild February. We hung out, and then I immediately went to I spent 3 weekends in a row contracting COVID. I'm not sure which one of the weekends it was.
Jeez.
But the weekend of February 14th, which is right after we met, Kristen and I went to Hawaii because we had the Magic World Championships in Honolulu on the weekend of February 14th. So serendipitously got to spend Valentine's Day in Hawaii, not the worst place to spend it. But, basically went from SeaTac to Honolulu Airport, back to SeaTac, spent 12 hours in Seattle, sleeping very quickly, turned around, flew back to LAX for DreamHack Anaheim, and then back to SeaTac, and then immediately turned around and went to Boston for PAX East.
Jeez.
So one weekend was Seattle to Honolulu, the next weekend was Seattle to LA, and then the next weekend was Seattle to Boston and back. So as soon as I got back from PAX, I was like, I don't feel so good, and they're talking about this COVID-19 thing on the news. That's not great. And I was on my ass, just dead to the world for like 3 weeks on the couch, and I was not in good shape. So that was fun. That's what happened immediately after the last time we saw each other.
Well, I'm glad you made it through.
Yeah.
I remember when you guys had come over telling me about all the escapades that you were about to launch into.
Yeah.
And I had mine, which was the Mortal Kombat finals in Chicago. And looking at your schedule, I thought, Hawaii's amazing. I love to go, but damn, dude, you're going to be tired. So you had all of that travel, plus this virus is going around, so your immune system was already taxed.
Yeah, and you and I have been to a ton of gaming conventions.
Oh, yeah.
Walking into a DreamHack, walking into a PAX, you've got the Con Crud or the PAX Pox. Like, you just notoriously get sick at these things. So I remember, every time I go to a con, I'll start to get that sniffle and like that tickle in my throat. I'm like, oh God, I hope I don't have the PAX Pox or the Con Crud. And here in the background, I'm walking through the airports, and it's just it's 28 days later. It's the opening scene before the virus has hit. You see all these news reports about pandemic spreading across the world, and I'm like, God, I really hope I just have the PAX Pox. It's totally shifted 180. I was like, I really hope I just have the normal sickness that I get every time. So
yeah, I found that taking vitamins helps, even if it's a placebo effect. Would help me. The worst I ever got sick was China. I had come back from China, or even in China, I had felt I was getting something, but I still worked through it because I had to work. I had to commentate. Right. But I felt terrible on the flight back, and then at home, I had to host another event for NASL, the championship, the finals that we did in Long Beach.
Yeah. And
I would come out and host and be my boisterous self to get the crowd super hyped up. We had a lot of fun, but then I'd be backstage coughing.
Yeah, I strongly believe in the placebo effect of all these like over the counter, like herbal, whatever stuff. Like I do a lot of emergency, the little powder packets. I do that when I'm at conventions. Whenever you end up at these after parties and you're drinking, I'll order a whiskey sour and I'll put some emergency in it, stir it up with my finger, and then chug that. I'm like, that's alcohol's going to suppress my immune system. We at least got to even the keel out a little bit.
You're burning something.
Yeah, exactly.
Might as well ride that vitamin C train.
Yeah.
You and I go way back.
Yeah.
In terms of our career. I mean, I'm thinking 2014, 2015.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I think we had at least known or had talked to each other at an event or at least online, and then you had come to work at ESL, and we had the privilege to sit next to each other and share all our crazy passions for pop culture. Yeah. But run through for me and for the audience what your experience was like with video games and your career and what led you to taking that job at ESL.
Sure. I mean, I was a lifelong gamer. I grew up... kind of on the older end of most gamers nowadays. I grew up literally on an Atari 2600, Apple IIgs, monochrome screen gaming and all that stuff. Definitely grew up on the lower end of the income spectrum. So like finding access to newer video game consoles and titles was always a real trick. Luckily, I had a lot of rich friends, so I would always be doing sleepovers at their places because they just got a Genesis, and I like Sonic. Wow, looks so cool! I gotta try that out. There was an arcade in the mall that we would go to all the time as kids, and I never had like pocket change or anything like that. If I did, I'd probably play like the Simpsons side scroller beat 'em up. Super fun.
I remember that one. Yeah,
that one, the 4-player X-Men cabinet I was in. I mean, those things were like quarter eaters, not the best spend for your dollar, but just had so much fun playing those with my older brother.
Whoever made those games knew we're gonna get money out of these kids. You want to play as Nightcrawler?
Yeah,
$5 at least trying to get through one of those levels.
Oh, absolutely. But I would always gravitate towards, it's like any arcade in the 90s. There was a ton of people that were gathered around the fighting game cabinets. There was people playing Street Fighter 2 Turbo, a bunch of people playing Marvel vs. Capcom when that came out. So I would always sit back and watch those. And I'm like, I've always been a button masher. I love fighting games, and they're so fun to watch for me. There's like really clear storytelling just unfolds on the screen. You don't even need to know what's going on. Just health bars moving, people fighting. It's always super fun and action packed. So I would watch those, and I would like go home and I would read like instruction manuals that my friends had like lent me for their fighting games. I was like, oh, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna beat your ass at Clay Fighter or whatever. And I would never remember a single move when I actually went back to play. But it was so fun. Like I loved a lot of like the world building they were trying to do in fighting games, even back then before they really had the graphic capabilities to tell cool stories. So yeah, that's how I got started. Consoles that whatever we could afford in my house, and then just mooching and leeching off my friends.
Yeah, borrowing and
yeah. I did build like I've been a pretty staunch advocate of building your own gaming PCs for a long time. I remember building old like Intel 486s to play Doom and Heretic and stuff like that, just with spare parts. When my friends would upgrade their systems, I'd be like, oh, you got a 4 megabyte RAM stick I can borrow, and then I could like make the screen on Heretic a little bit bigger so I could actually see what was going on.
Wow, 4 megabyte. Wow.
Yeah, I know, right? The numbers have just escalated so much lately. But yeah, and then I started getting high school jobs and stuff like that. Worked a lot as a kid. I've had every blue collar job under the sun. You basically name a fast food chain. Like I used to work the morning shift at Dunkin' Donuts. I used to work at Panera Bread. I've sort of worked everywhere. I worked in a New England style fried seafood place. So I was like cooking up like haddock sandwiches and stuff. And everything was every dollar went into my rig. Even at the point where it was just adding RGB to it, like every dollar went into that gaming PC, and it's been like that ever since. So
nice. So currently, we have World of Warcraft, the expansion coming out.
Yeah, Shadowlands drops in like less than 4 hours.
Yeah. So make sure we'll get you home for that. Yeah. But you and I both have histories with World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
And I remember playing the stress test during my time in the Air Force when I was at the University of Utah. Mm-hmm. And I knew I was going to flunk my first ever class ever, Japanese. Not because I didn't love Japanese, but I was taking way too many credit hours at the time, plus all the Air Force activities I was doing, plus World of Warcraft was coming out.
Right, yeah.
So it was a lot.
Yeah.
But that game changed everything because it took kind of the experience of what people were seeing, what the capabilities of the internet was like with EverQuest, and then they Blizzardified it, right? Blizzard would do that with like an RTS, like Command & Conquer. Like, oh, that's neat. Or Warhammer. Oh, that's cool. Let's make make it our way,
Right.
and it resonates with everybody. So this was the MMO RPG that resonated and took over the world for many years.
Yeah, and
Why is it still around? Why is it still popular?
well, a lot of people forget that before World of Warcraft was a little game called Warcraft 3, and before that was Warcraft 2, and before that was Warcraft, Orcs vs. Humans. And those games, I remember playing Warcraft 2 using Direct Connect over modem. So I would like dial my friend's house, and his computer would pick up, and we would play, matches against each other, and a match would go for hours. And if somebody picked up the phone, we lost everything. But Warcraft had this huge cult following. I mean, every Warcraft game that came out broke records. Before WoW, it was on the cover of PC Gamer. It was on the cover of all these different magazines. And then they said, hey, now you can play Warcraft with 40 other people and go slay Onyxia. You can run around the capital city, and there's this vibrant, always on community. So World of Warcraft didn't just come out of nowhere. It almost feels like it did 16 years later.
Yeah.
But I think one of the reasons World of Warcraft is still around today is it's got the perfect mix of nostalgia that can hook back the returning player. I come back every expansion, even if I sort of churn out at some point because of game loops or something like that. I've literally played every WoW expansion. I'll get to max level, I'll raid with my guild, and then I'll stop if I'm bored, or I'll stick around and we'll get cutting edge and all these awesome achievements for pushing the boundary of raiding.
And just to kind of break down the experience for some people that are not familiar with World of Warcraft, you have a character, you create that character at level 1. That character interacts with the environment, takes quests, goes to all sorts of different areas. So you're exploring, you're hearing beautiful music, you're seeing different sights and sounds.
The music is so good.
It is like reading a novel, but you are the main character kind of dictating where you're going. That's how I explained it to my folks.
Yeah.
But every new expansion comes out, and it's like a new chapter in the novel where you get to explore a new realm.
Yeah, that's a great explanation of the game. Sometimes you don't feel like the epic star of a massive action fantasy franchise.
Yeah.
When you're now like 9 expansions in, and you walk into the new content, they're like, hey, now you're in this crazy land that you've never been in before, and the first quest giver you get is like, hey, my pig escaped. Can you go find my pig for me? And I'm like, dude, I got old gods to slay. I've killed 6 of them already. Like,
but then the reward. Then the reward is a green, but the green's better than your purple.
But he's like, if you kill this pig, I'll give you a sword that's better than this shard of a falling star that's slayed a god. And I'm like, okay, well,
yeah.
If it's better, it's better.
Exactly.
Now I'm in. Yeah.
That's how I felt when Burning Crusade came out, because I was trying to do my best to get my best paladin armor back then, and then I do my first quest at Burning Crusade, and I go, "What? This?
Why is it better?
Yeah. And why is it better?" And that's because they want you to be incentivized to keep going. That's
usually why I end up stop playing games, or why I stop playing in the middle of a WoW expansion. Is I will play, and then I will realize at some point I'll be decked head to toe. I look like a space marine from Warhammer 40K, ready to just mow down enemies, and I'm like, this stuff is only going to last me another year until the next expansion comes out, and all this crap's worthless. And then I'm like, all right, I'm done. Like, if I know it's going to be worthless, I'll just wait until the stuff comes out that's going to replace this. So that's usually where I burn out. But there was, for almost a decade, I was raid leading, guild master, main tank. If you play WoW, that's a decent burden of responsibility. If you don't, just know that I spent about 60 hours a week playing World of Warcraft on top of my 2 jobs.
But you're leading an entire group of people. You're organizing and strategizing to defeat this boss, and this boss has so many. Each boss has a different mechanic, different trap, where everybody's got to jump at the same time or do this or do that, and it gets really annoying when people don't listen to instructions. So if you are able,
it's Rick. Rick does not listen to instructions.
Damn it, Rick.
Rick, get out of the fire. Stop standing. I know you can heal yourself, but if you're healing yourself through the fire, Rick, you're not healing me, and then I die. So get out of the gosh dang fire.
But that's how I would feel. Anybody that has on their resume that they were a raid leader and WoW, I'd be like, this is a project manager. They know how to
I've definitely put my World of Warcraft experience on applications before, depending on what company it's for. Obviously, I wouldn't put that on for like a job at a bank. But when I've applied at gaming companies before, I've said, I was guild master, main tank, raid leader for a guild. We got, ahead of the curve, which is an achievement you get when you kill raid content when it's at its hardest before it gets nerfed. Cutting edge, which is like you do even harder content while it's still brand new. the greatest moment of my WoW career, I got Realm First level 90 Druid, which was, I was literally the Druid on our server, which, you know, servers tens of thousands of people, and I was the Druid that hit the new level cap first, which was, it was 24 hours of just chugging monsters and, you know, eating Doritos and really being that stereotypical gamer. But
there's a drive of that sense of accomplishment.
Sure.
That progression.
Well, when you inspect other players, you can see what their achievements are. And
Yeah.
I'm like, when people inspect you and they see Realm First level 90, they're like, this guy fucks.
Yeah, this guy fucks in this game for sure. I started my experience in World of Warcraft with a paladin, but the latest time that I played, which was a couple years ago, I switched to a rogue. And that's also the beauty of an MMORPG where you can kind of reinvent yourself and experience it differently. To me, it's the same with a fighting game when you choose a different character and realize. And that's what I'm going through with Melina right now, because I was so used to my katana combos and her zoning and staying away that I'm falling back to that defensively with Melina, and that's not the way that she is to be played.
Right.
And so it's like I have to unlearn these traits of myself. And that was the same thing with my rogue, where I'm like, oh, I can't press a button and just bubble shield and be healed. I got to get the hell out of there or they're going to kill me, you know?
Yeah.
And that to me is a testament to how much human development goes into these different games and how they can be such a different experience for you versus me, depending on how we create our characters, but it's the same game for the same purchase price.
You know what's interesting? You mentioned sort of, you know, you can take these different roles on within a game like WoW. You know, you pick your class, and you know, even to a lesser extent, the different races you can pick, like orcs, trolls, that kind of stuff. They've all got slightly different abilities. And in fighting games, you know, you can play characters where you kind of turtle more, or you're like more aggro. You do like more like aerial openers. Basically, all the best games in the world have that level of self-expression, right? You got League of Legends. It's like, oh, I play jungle, I play ADC, I play support. Any game that lets you sort of find a play style within the game and it sort of fits within that game world, I feel like that's one thing that players are super driven towards, right? Like whether I don't think there's a game out there where people don't have some form of self-expression where they can really say, oh, when you talk about the game, I think about the way I play the game, not the game. Like when you talk to a League player and you say, oh, do you play League? They're like, yeah, I play League. I main Nami, or I main whoever, right? And then they'll talk about either the specific character they play, if it's got like a hero selection pool, or they'll talk about the style they play, the position they play. When you talk about Counter-Strike, people are like, oh, I'm a really good opper, you know, whatever. And that's one thing that I've noticed a lot since now I'm at Wizards of the Coast is like, you know, that's I see it so much in Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering. D&D is the same thing. Like, you know, do you play a rogue? Do you play a warrior? Do you do whatever? And you really get more into it there because you kind of have the world is your oyster. All the tools are at your disposal in a game like D&D, where you're not just handed like pick these 2 check boxes. You can kind of really create everything you want. So I feel like any game that's not going out of its way to give players more opportunity to invent the game as they want to play it is really doing yourself a disservice.
And you expertly described how people feel associated to players in the professional scene of this person plays the character or the style that I play. I can watch that person and emulate him or her to get better at the game. You know, you can do that in traditional sports, basketball, baseball, football, but you need an entire team in order to execute and practice and get that stuff done, right? Yeah. You can look towards a quarterback or a running back or a tight end or a center to be like, okay, he plays the game perfectly the way that I, you know, want to play that position. Yeah. And that's the one thing that I get very, very frustrated about is when people over at Ford's and other places that write these articles that go, oh, look at all these numbers for gaming and it's more than basketball and there's so much money to be made. I go, these numbers are not being accurately represented for what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're aggregating all the League of Legends fans, the Call of Duty fans, the Destiny fans, the different fighting game fans, because every fighting game has its own community, and you're saying, oh, you can profit off this entire aggregate group? Right. No. You cannot do that.
And gaming in itself, you know, people used to say all the time, like, oh, I'm a gamer. It became like this like core identity thing. And, you know, people would just wear a T-shirt that had a Nintendo controller on, the original NES controller. And you would see them and you go, hey, a gamer. I know. I like games too. But like, I think kind of what you're talking about is just gaming is, when people talk about gaming in aggregate, they don't realize it's kind of a disingenuous way to talk about gaming, because it really is a bunch of fractured micro communities, and they're not a monolith. Like, there's some games, some of the most successful games of all time were super successful because they split the party. Like look at a game like The Last of Us 2, right? Like that game sold a great number of copies, and it had a ton of articles written about it, a ton of social media buzz and activity. And if you just looked at the hashtag, you could say, look at how much activity is buzzing around Last of Us 2. I'm actually in the middle of playing it through for the first time right now, so I haven't finished it or anything, but I'm like 30 hours in. I know a bunch of people hated that game.
Yeah.
And a bunch of people loved that game. And to just look at like, oh, what's the reach and the impression of the media around this game, you wouldn't get a clear picture of actually like the community reception, because gamers are not a monolith. Anytime a new patch comes out for a game, right, when they add a new operator or a new map into something like Rainbow Six Siege, right, there's going to be a certain amount of Siege players that love it, a certain amount of Siege players that hate it, and you can't just look at the numbers for like how many people are talking about it, because some of it's positive, some of it's negative. Anytime you treat gamers as a monolith, you're going to do yourself a super strong disservice, especially if you're, like an investor that's trying to get into the gaming space, because you and I both have seen like just the immense surge of bad faith actors and snake oil salesmen that have gotten into the gaming, specifically the esports space. I can't tell you how many LinkedIn requests I get from esports, consultants. And I'm like, I've never heard of this guy. Not that means he's nobody, because I haven't heard of everybody, but I look who he's connected with, and I'm like, what has this guy ever done? Nothing. He's never worked in esports, but there's a lot of bad faith actors out there who don't understand the space, and like I'm still learning. I'm a lifelong student. I'm always learning, but there's a lot of to put a bow on that. Don't treat gamers as a monolith.
Yeah, amen. You and I saw a lot of shit in Los Angeles, and some of my favorite moments living in that city were on Halloween. And when we got to hang out a number of Halloweens and walking through those crowds.
Well, because you were in North Hollywood technically, right?
I was in Burbank. I live in Burbank.
Yeah,
but
and I was in Hollywood.
You were in Hollywood,
and we would do Halloweens, and we'd jump back and forth and see what the Valley and LA were doing. So
that's the one thing that I'll probably miss the most living in California.
For me, it's always going to be food. The food scene in LA is just so good.
It's eclectic, man. It's got so many different things.
But I think we're both talking about the same thing, because really it's the people. The people bring about,
because they're coming from everywhere.
Yeah.
Los Angeles, I learned this years ago back in my Mormon days. I had a missionary president that said Los Angeles is the entire world in one place. And that always stuck with me, because it's true. And being able to speak Spanish helped me unlock a lot more of that world, because there was so much culture that originated before it even became state, from that. But
but when I say I love food, really that's an expression of the people of Los Angeles bringing all their food from all over the world. When you say you love sort of not the party scene, but like when on events like Halloween, you walk around anywhere and you're like, this is an insane place.
It's to have so many artists that bring their A game with costumes and characters. There's nothing else like it that I've seen. And it's really what happens when you put an entire city of professionals together and they want to celebrate. So
I think,
it's pretty cool.
Just to sort of keep my horizons open, I think participating in something like Carnival or something in one of these Latin American countries, I think probably approaches the energy of Halloween in Los Angeles. It's just that total party atmosphere, just all these insane artists and creators and characters out there doing crazy stuff.
And people from different religions. The Hare Krishnas were out there chanting and singing. It just, you could feel the vibe. There's
always the one guy with the "you're all gonna burn in hell" sign, and I'm like, this guy shows up to every debaucherous parade and party. I think he just wants to hang out here, but he's gotta.
It's how he justifies.
He's got to pretend like he's not into.
I have to monitor these people.
I've got to monitor all these very sexy heathens.
Dang. So, what attracted you to ESL? I was approached after working with the World of Tanks crew at NASL and working at NASL. That wasn't working out because World of Tanks was moving to ESL America. But it was a company previously, I forget the acronym, but it was ESS. Han and Craig and Kevin. And then ESL Europe was expanding to America. They bought out that company.
Speaking of Craig,
and then,
I believe he just got nominated into the Esports Hall of Fame.
Yes, he did.
Amazing.
Congratulations to him.
Great work for Craig.
Absolutely.
I remember Craig. I actually met Craig in Dallas at a CPL, very early 2000s. When he was Torbull and Team 3D.
Going way back.
I think I must have actually bumped into Stromberg there as well at the Bears, and Rambo and all these other guys that ended up working at ESS and then ESL. What drew me to ESL originally? I was working. So when I originally moved to LA. You and I've talked about this a little bit. I was an EMT, emergency medical technician. I grew up on the East Coast, right outside Boston, southern New Hampshire, northern Massachusetts, for 25 29 years. I don't know. I'm very bad at time. And long story short, moved to LA because a girl, and she was pursuing acting. And she was like, I can't be an actor in Southern New Hampshire. And I was like, I can be an EMT in LA. Unsurprisingly, people do get shot there. So I moved, we moved in together. And while I was there, I was like, oh man, I really should pursue gaming. Like I've always wanted to pursue gaming full time as a job. Like, being an EMT is super emotionally rewarding. You get to help people out when they're at their lowest, when they need the most help in the world. It's super emotionally rewarding. It is not at all financially rewarding. So, hey, you know what? EMTs aren't in it for the money. That much you can be sure of. But yeah, I was working a 48-hour shift, one 48-hour shift a week. So I'd go in Friday night and I would leave Sunday night.
Dang.
So that was great because it let me go back to school full time. So I was going to school full time at University of California, Riverside, UCR. Anybody who's familiar with Southern California geography knows that that's about a 62-mile drive from Los Angeles. So I was doing that 2 to 3 times a week. And while I was going back to school, I was doing the EMT thing. I also had a part-time job where I worked at a nonprofit video game startup that did like educational video games. Super fun. Got to sort of see the ins and outs of game development. Realized I didn't really want to work at a game developer. And then, as a former semi-pro competitive Counter-Strike player, CS 1.6 way back in the day, that's why I was at CPL.
Yeah.
There was a opportunity where a friend of mine who was a producer for the Food Network was like, hey, do you want to come work on Next Iron Chef? And I was like, yeah. I'm sure the food's great at lunchtime. So I started working in TV and film production very sort of like surreptitiously, where I started as a PA and I was, just like unloading trucks and moving boxes and just like very grunt work, getting producers coffee and stuff. And I'm, very technically proficient. I've been building computers for a long time. And one day I think one of the producers was like having a laptop problem. They couldn't get on the Wi-Fi and I had to go like download a driver, put it on a USB key, fix stuff. And then they're like, hey, this kid's really smart. We should probably see if he wants to do anything else around set that's a little bit more technical. And then I kind of slowly climbed the ranks of just traditional TV film production. And then that producer, her name's Bryn. She's an awesome human being. She saw a post on her Facebook from a guy named Kevin Rosenblatt because they had connected doing a documentary about gaming like a decade earlier. And Kevin was like, hey, I need somebody that knows video games and TV and film production. And Bryn messaged me and she's like, hey, I know this guy, Kevin. I know you're a gamer, TV and film production at this point. You're interested in, I was like, yeah, sure. So I reached out to Kevin and, he was, I forget what his role was at the time. Was he VP of product management, maybe?
Something like
ASL,
that. Yeah.
North America. I forget what his title was at the time. And I went in for an interview. And he and I actually had a crazy CS overlap where he knew a ton of the same people from CS 1.6 that I had. And he was like, and I was like, wait a minute, what was your handle? And he's like, oh, it was Lethal. And I was like, do you remember a guy named Zero Love hanging out in the DFW CS 1.6 server with like Hat Clan? And he's like, holy crap. He's like, yeah, that actually sounds kind of familiar. And from then I was kind of in, like when you've got that old school connection within esports, it's a lot easier for some doors to open. So it was a right place, right time thing. I think having it was, I was afforded a lot of opportunities along the way that not everybody is. I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to get into TV and film production in a slightly more meaningful way because I, had friends in the industry that helped get me the foot in the door gig, and then like I sort of showed up in a bigger way, and like literally one day on set at Iron Chef, I think I just started wearing slacks and like a button-down shirt. And they'd be like, all you PAs, go unload the truck. Shaun, go in the trailer and see if they need help. So like it was very much like dress for the job you want kind of thing. So that was super fun. And then, I got offered the gig at ESL, and I actually ended up dropping out of UC Riverside because I was like, I'm going to school to try to get a full-time job at ESL. Yeah. Why would I keep paying money out the door, student loans? I had to leave my internship. I had this really cool, it's not an internship, it's a pre-trainee program. I was actually at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab doing some climate science stuff through this program called Direct STEM, which is Data Intensive Research Education Coordination and Training in Science, Technology, Education, and Mathematics.
Nice.
That was a deep cut. I don't know what happened. I blacked out. So yeah, that was a super fun opportunity. I always put it on every resume because people see NASA Jet Propulsion Lab and they're like, I assume NASA did their homework. This guy's
yeah,
in.
that's a good one to put on paper.
So that's how I got started at ESL. I had a bunch of TV production experience, and I had worked on a couple. It's called like second screen content for feature films and stuff. So like if you buy the Blu-ray edition, the re-release for Back to the Future, I'm in the credits for Back to the Future, despite the fact that I'm way too young to have possibly worked on Back to the Future. We shot some cool like second screen stuff. We had Christopher Lloyd and a DeLorean and a hoverboard and shot a bunch of content. I worked on that. Worked on Ride Along 2 second screen content. My friend Krista got me a couple gigs working on that stuff. So I mean, my resume wasn't super impressive when it came to TV and film production, but it was enough to get my foot in the door. And they're like, he's been on set a bunch of times. He knows how to be around on set, and he clearly knows video games. I talked to Kevin and Philip Holmes, who was on the agency team at ESL. They both interviewed me, and they're like, this guy seems smart. He seems like he knows what he's doing. Let's give him a shot. And started as a product manager and was at ESL for, I want to say, 3-4 years.
Yeah.
Worked my way up through product manager to partner manager, which basically at the end of most gigs where I worked with a client at ESL, they were like, that was super fun. If we do this again, we want to make sure that we get Shaun. And I think that's sort of like a couple people like raised their ears, like that's a good sign. So instead of being like, when you were a product manager or project manager at ESL, you would oftentimes be a ping pong ball, just smashing event to event to event without a ton of time to like build up relationships with the clients. And when I transferred to partner manager, it was very much you are in charge of this client, and then you're going to do this thing, but you're also planning the next thing and the thing after that and the thing after that. So it's not just a bunch of one-offs that build to nothing. It was actually like a steady incline where you're actually building on that relationship. And then as the partner manager at ESL, one of many partnership managers at ESL, I ended up jumping over to Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah.
As a lifelong Magic and D&D fan, it's just like...
You had to.
It went from like dream job to like dreamier job, you know?
What was some of your favorite moments or memories working at ESL when it comes to projects? Like, because we did a lot of live events.
A lot of live events.
But do you have any that really stand out for you?
There's a couple of specific ones that jump out at me, and there's probably some underlying stuff that makes those my favorites. One of my all-time favorite events I got to work on was QuakeCon. 2018. It was the first year Quake Champions had come out, and anybody that's been in esports for a long time knows that Quake is sort of like the grandfather of esports. The 1v1 history between players like Rafa and Cooler and like all these guys is just so. It's like the heavyweight boxing matches of the century. Like when these players come out and play against each other, it's so like the skill ceiling to Quake is almost non-existent, right? And that's why there's maybe 20 players on the planet that can play Quake at that level. StarCraft is very similar. People talk about, I play StarCraft, but it's like, do you play StarCraft? Because there's 100 people on the planet at any given time that play StarCraft.
Yeah, that have APM over 400.
Right. Yeah. So Quake for sure, because I remember Charles Watson actually talked about this a little bit because he was the producer for QuakeCon 2018. And he and I talked quite a bit about sort of just wandering around the Bring Your Own Computer, the BYOC hall at QuakeCon. And I think he described it best when he said, this is like the primordial spawning pool from which esports originally emerged in eons past. And it smells very much like a primordial spawning pool 3 days in. But
Old Spice, where you at with the sponsors? Come on.
QuakeCon it has such an iconic history. And it was one of my favorite projects to manage. We got to work directly with id Software. They came to us really early on. They came to ESL really early on in the process of even working on Quake Champions. And they said, hey, we want to go big with esports and sort of bring in a lot of ways, esports and Quake competitive had this fork where they didn't really always line up because, esports, ESL was doing mega events, IEMs and ESL 1s and filling arenas, and Quake was always more of like a grassroots organization, almost like the FGC. They kind of just weren't directly associated with what normal, like, air quotes, esports was doing. Yeah. And Quake came to us and they said, hey, this IEM, this ESL 1 stuff, like we kind of want to ask you guys what we're doing wrong, or not wrong, but like how do we sort of appeal to the larger competitive gaming audience, because up until that point, the only people that were watching Quake were Quake players, and it is one of those things where like I don't know anything about boxing, I don't know anything about boxing matches, but when there's a huge fight on, everybody's like, where are you going to go see the fight? Where are you going to see the fight? And in a lot of ways, I think that's kind of what Quake 1v1 could do. So long story short, QuakeCon 2018, definitely like one of my all-time favorite events. I got to work on it with Timo and Brian and Ian and Chelsea and a bunch of the ESL folks.
Yeah.
Super great crew. Those folks were just amazing to work with. And the people from id were great. The people from Bethesda and ZeniMax were awesome. Super fun, super great team. And it was in Dallas, so we got to work with a lot of the Paperlight folks on production and stuff. And those guys are some of my favorite humans on the planet. And number 2 would probably be, I don't want to put them in order. I'm not stack.
That's all right.
I'm not stack ranking these.
They're on the same bookshelf. Bookshelf.
Another one would definitely be the VR League. That was when ESL, Intel, and Facebook kind of worked together to launch the world's first VR esports league. We rotated through a bunch of different titles to sort of mix and match it. Ready Player One had just come out, so it was a really interesting time to be working in the VR space.
I remember when we outfitted one of the side studio rooms that we had into the VR space, and there was that like magic casting game or whatever, but you could go to different pillars and then throw spells.
Yeah. It's called The Unspoken by Insomniac.
Yeah.
Insomniac made that.
That was the one that I played, and I went, oh, okay, I can see the potential here.
Yeah. That one, the great thing about that one is I was always not reticent, but a little, let's just say I had a healthy level of skepticism, as I do towards all things.
Sure.
Where people were really trying to push VR esports early on. I said, hey, I got assigned to this as the project manager. I maybe didn't quite fully buy in emotionally to the concept of VR esports. And Tasty Steve came by and played The Unspoken at DreamHack Austin. That was the last year they did it in Austin before they moved it. He came by and we had that mixed reality booth, and he was playing it and he was watching it, and I think we even had him guest commentate a match or two, and he was like, oh, it's a fighting game. He's like, these players are turtling. He's like, he immediately adapted a lot of the language that gets used in like an FGC match.
Nice.
And I was just like, watching Tasty Steve, who's like such a great, awesome, charismatic dude. I was watching him cast this game, which like obviously didn't really have a competitive scene yet. The game was like, I don't even think it was like out of beta yet. But he was casting it, and I was like, oh, now I get it. Like I was watching him call the action. I was like, absolutely, I totally understand. And now I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. VR to me, I think the current benchmark is Half-Life Alyx. That's the one title that I really would like to play.
Yeah.
I upgraded my graphics card, but I still got to upgrade my processor for my PC. It's good enough, but when I checked online, it's like, if you upgrade your processor, you'll increase your capacity or your performance by 20%. Like, that's a big performance, but I don't want to drop another $600. But have you played Half-Life Alyx?
I own it.
Okay.
And I have a VR headset that was lovingly donated to me by Oculus after I worked on the VR League.
Nice.
And I have not played it yet, only because I don't have the physical space to properly set up VR the way I would want to play Alyx. I've got a pretty great setup. I do a very small amount of streaming on Twitch, but I've corralled myself into an area that's like really good for what I need it to be, and that is just unfortunately not VR. So
okay.
My lease is up in a couple months, and I'm going to look for a space that I can actually deck out for VR.
There you go.
I've heard and I've watched a couple videos that talk about Half-Life Alyx performance, and they say it's a game that's actually fairly well optimized to run on, I don't want to say lower end hardware because that might come across as a slight towards your poor processor, but it does.
It's optimized for,
it does seem like it runs pretty well on most systems.
Cool.
Kind of like StarCraft. StarCraft, you can run StarCraft pretty well. Just turn all the settings down. It runs buttery smooth.
That's the beauty of games that are engineered that way in the PC market, is that they have to be able to run the game on so many different specs, an open system, if you will, compared to consoles where it's all the same.
That's one of the big struggles of PC gaming for sure.
Yeah, but you talked about kind of the esports world and then the FGC kind of the separation. I feel that separation is just inherent with PC versus console and how that's kind of evolved into the ecosystem of the PC esports, where it's it's your Counter-Strike, Rainbow Six for the most part's on PC. Your RTSs, your Quakes, because of the response time with the keyboard and the mouse. But consoles has the majority of the audience. The majority of people in the Western Hemisphere play on console.
Well, if you want to extrapolate, I think the majority of people play on mobile. The majority of video games.
If we want to count mobile, yeah, sure. But I think just in terms of an audience base, and that's what's been exciting to see for me, having spent so much time in the PC world. My career building from StarCraft 2, and seeing so many console players and titles now having a larger impact on YouTube and Twitch.
You know what I think a huge part of it is it has to do with sponsors. When we saw this in the early 2000s, when Counter-Strike made the move from CS 1.6 on the Half-Life engine
I love this story.
to CS Source. And the community fractured in half. There was the purists, the diehard OGs that were like, 1.6 is the only Counter-Strike I'll ever play. And a bunch of people were like, well, we got to move to Source. The graphics are better. And people are like, why does that matter? And it's like Intel and NVIDIA and these hardware sponsors are not going to come out and spend millions of dollars committing to sponsoring these video games when it'll run at 600 frames a second on an e-machine you bought at Walmart, right? Like if you're not selling new PC hardware, it's really tough to attract sponsors. I mean, sure, you can get like gaming chairs and mice and keyboards and headsets, and the tech in that space is surprisingly still, like, the line is being pushed there pretty frequently. But I think that is kind of one of the things that put a death blow. That is one of the things that was the death blow in the early Counter-Strike scene. Like, esports was on this huge rise early 2000s. I think CBS bought the broadcast rights for CPL, and then the whole thing kind of burst.
Well, I think everything kind of burst too around the 2008 collapse. Like, it was all around that time.
But I think it's really important to note that that's probably one of the reasons that any sort of PC gaming generally can attract larger dollar sponsorships, better non-endemic sponsors, because they just know that it also has a lot to do with mouse and keyboard inputs largely. I can't think of a ton of PC esports where controllers dominate outside of, I think, one of the new Halo titles. I forget which. Timo's going to kill me for not remembering. And Sims. And Kyle. Jeez, we got a lot of Halo friends. I think overall it does come down to dollars. Most things that esports do at the end of the day. I think the lack of sponsorability for console tournaments from hardware developers, right? Like, it's just Sony and Microsoft, even the folks like, Scuf and some of the peripheral manufacturers, they don't really come in with dollar sponsorships. It's usually just like a value in kind trade where they'll give you 100 controllers and gaming chairs, that kind of stuff. And I think you've always got to follow the money as to why one scene might be bigger than the other. Yeah, absolutely. Well, having microtransactions in your game is the reason why League of Legends overtook StarCraft 2 so quickly. Yeah. StarCraft 2 overtook Halo because this massive influx of people who were huge fans of the RTS world and could communicate and have forums dedicated to their entire way of life of StarCraft, that it was like all the kindling was there. It just needed that spark, and that spark was being able to broadcast live, and MLG was able to rein that in because they'd been doing it with Halo. And then League of Legends just took off because they were ringing in so much money. Because every week there was a new character with new skins you could buy. Compared to StarCraft 2, there was no microtransactions. It was only purchase the game and that was it. And you start to overtake. We had success within the console market, especially with Mortal Kombat, because we added the microtransaction of the skin for Sub-Zero, which was able to fund multiple seasons for the Pro League. Right, So you have to have that monetary ecosystem built into the game, just like teams have ticket sales, merchandise sales, and stuff for traditional sports. If you don't have it, it's not a thriving ecosystem, or it's really difficult to try to build it. It's just that there's a ceiling for how much. There's a pretty low ceiling for how much money you can get out of a player, and not that players should be treated like a pocketbook or anything like that. But ultimately, there's the games that do the best financially sort of have no upper limit on how much money, because you do want to provide, as a business, you want to provide an opportunity for whales to sink a bunch of money into your game. There's people out there that have bought 600,000 Riot points, and those people are keeping the lights on at Riot Games over in Santa Monica, I think ultimately you need to be careful how high you let the ceiling grow, because there's obviously, there's a lot of studies that show the overlap between gaming addiction and gambling addiction. And even people that are buying cosmetics that don't affect the game at all, a lot of people have this sort of completionist need to just unlock every skin in the game, and people will max out credit cards and just I think that there's definitely a healthy balance to be had, but between making sure that you have a wide enough pipeline for people who want to monetize within your game, do it, and making sure that people who have unhealthy behavioral habits can't bankrupt themselves.
Yeah. Well, it's unhealthy for the industry not to articulate what it is, gambling. And EA has been the worst example we've seen, even in litigation and in the courtroom, of their way to try to say, oh, it's surprise mechanics, and finagle their way around gambling laws that have been established to where the hard numbers show that children are stealing their parents' credit cards to try to buy this stuff, right? It's not a healthy approach. It's difficult when you have investors reaming you for like, you have to have this because we can increase our growth. Well, if growth is the only metric that you care about at the detriment of your customers, that's not good. And there should be consequences to that.
Yeah, it also limits the opportunity for future growth. Not enough people recognize that squeezing all the juice out of the orange might discourage other oranges from showing up. It's a terrible metaphor. But, there's something to be said for, there was the infamously sort of, I think it was a year ago now, maybe it was a year and a half ago now, Blizzard posted like record numbers at their earnings report, and then they laid off.
Yeah. 800 people or something like that.
It was a disheartening number of people, and it was people in a lot of ancillary roles, the effects of which I don't think Blizzard has fully felt yet. It was people in communities, community management roles. It was people in a lot of the roles where you might look at it if you're just, like a pencil pushing consultant, and you might see, I don't understand how these people contribute to the bottom line, but it's the people that sort of master a lot of the soft skills and help make your community feel a little stickier and a little bit more coherent. And it's really tough to draw a box around that level of customer support. Blizzard for a long time did really well on customer support. I remember, opening tickets and just chatting with the game masters that would show up because they didn't have, a backlogged queue that was like nowadays you open a ticket in WoW and they'll get to you in 4 days. And I don't know if that's directly related to those actions, but it's certainly something to be said for the fact that, you used to have the people you were interacting with on the customer service side would take time out of their day to be a little bit more personable, and they would, try to understand your problems. Nowadays, they just send you a link to the forums, and they're like, go look here, try uninstalling your add-ons and whatever. It's a very ho-hum response sometimes, and I feel like they generally emphasize a little bit too heavily on the monetization side and not enough on the community side. Every game publisher out there, every game developer out there struggles to quantify the value of community, and certainly the humans that provide and help build a framework for the community. We know all the best esports out there have thriving communities, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a ton of game developers that'll come up to me at an event like PAX or whatever, and they'll just say, we're working on building the next great esport. And I kind of just laugh. And it's like, you don't get to decide.
I remember so many kids in Europe and other people came to me when Overwatch had been announced. Like, it's going to be the next great esport. Yeah. You don't know that.
Right.
Nobody knows. It has to be built from the ground up.
Here's how it works. You make a game, and then if people like the game, they'll turn it into an esport. You literally have no say in the matter. League of Legends and Dota, and to an extent all MOBAs, sort of owe their heritage and lineage to Dota 1 on the Warcraft 3 engine, which was a community-built mod. Counter-Strike, community-built mod. All of the top-tier esports that are out there all were community-built versions of a game a publisher made. Like, Valve didn't set out to make Half-Life to be something that people would eventually mod into an esport, right? Like, that story happened so far outside of Valve. And the same thing goes with the MOBA genre. Like, these things completely came up like out of nowhere. And I think it's really tough to even define esport in a lot of ways. Like, when does a game become an esport? I have a pretty good answer to the question, but I think overall, that lack of clarity from people about like, when is our game an esport is one of the big reasons that you see so many snake oil salesmen enter the space and bad faith actors, because we can't even agree on what the definition of an esport is. How are we gonna, Yeah. I love seeing Slasher on Twitter, and he's like, Among Us is esports now, Fall Guys is esports.
Fall Guys, yeah. I like Slasher being the canary in the coal mine for so many of these snake oil salesmen that do pop up, and seeing his responses on Twitter, then I'll chime in here or there. There's no magic wand to create another slasher today. You have to have lived it. You have to have been exposed to so many different things and different games. Like, how many people out there have seen from the infancy of Quake all the way to today and can tell you what works and what doesn't work?
It's 30 people total.
Probably 30 people around the world.
The first one that came to mind was definitely Marcus. DJ Wheat for
Absolutely.
sure.
And a lot of these people are in the positions they should be.
But nobody's got the hair of Slasher. It's really Rod's hairs.
Yeah. I remember working in New York and doing MLG events up in the 3rd Park Avenue or whatever they were, and Slasher and all these StarCraft players and fans and all of us just huddled around this couch watching some of the best players ever in the game and feeling that we were really accomplishing something great. We were pushing the envelope when it came to technology and telling these stories. Yeah. We had 14 streams going on at one time up in that high rise. It was nuts. But to not understand the business implications of what it took for them to do this, the cost, and were they making the cost back?
Right.
No.
And that's another one of the things that a lot of gaming companies are still struggling with is how do you quantify esports? Is it do you look at esports as marketing? Is it user acquisition? Is it user retention? Is it, what is esports in your business portfolio? It's obviously games that can monetize with things like DLC and add-on content and stuff like that. The more people that are watching, backtrack. There's these really great charts that come out every year after an IEM or an ESL one. And anytime there's a big mega event for Counter-Strike, the player hour numbers for Counter-Strike on Steam jumps. Yeah. Because everybody watches it and they go, oh, Counter-Strike, man, Counter-Strike's so fucking great. And they all hop on and they all start playing Counter-Strike again. And that's great, but does Counter-Strike monetize the crate system, the skin system enough? Do they have a positive loop there in place that takes those new influx of players or returning players that have previously churned out? So esports in like that model, esports is very inarguably a great marketing vehicle because it gets everybody back playing your game, right? Like every year after LCS, every year after the international every year, Dota players spike huge because you want to buy the compendium and get all the stuff. The games that are doing it the best, I think, are probably Rainbow Six Siege because they have very intelligently and very clearly and perfectly, intentionally mirrored their release schedule of new content to line up with their major tent poles for esports.
Yeah, seasons.
Yeah,
they built seasons.
It's brilliant. It can't be understated how smart that is because if you're a Siege fan, you want to turn into the esports finals and you want to see the new operators, the new maps, the new expansions, the new gadgets, whatever, right? Like, and I don't play Siege, so I'm probably talking out of my ass, but
I played when it first came out, and I'm very impressed with how well they've been doing.
I've played Siege a bunch, but as a Counter-Strike player, I get eminently frustrated when I play Siege because people are just like yelling at me, and they're like, "You have to shoot a hole in the floor. Why would you not know to do that?" And I'm like, "This is not my world.
Use the hammer."
Yeah. But man, you know what would be fun to talk about for a second is Battle Royale.
Yeah.
As a genre, because that was kind of the first time since MOBAs that we had a new genre pop up in like the esports space. I think to varying degrees of success. Folks like PUBG and Fortnite, H1Z1 with their TwitchCon invitationals and stuff. There's a ton of history behind the battle royale genre, and one thing we had talked about a little earlier, I'll wrap this up full circle, was everybody wants to identify with something when they're watching esports, right? If I'm a support player in League of Legends, I'm probably going to find a player on TSM or whoever that I think is the best support in the world, or at least plays characters that I like, and I'm going to watch them because I'm a support player. I want to watch a support player, right? People tend to have these like either like a team affiliation, like I'm Cloud9 fanboy number one, right? One of the things that makes one of the biggest production challenges to Battle Royale esports is there's this problem where if you tuned in to see either a player or a team in a battle royale, you might never get to, right? Like the games that do screen time for your dog in the fight the best are fighting games because the person you came to see is on the screen 100% of the time.
Yep.
If you're watching a match and you are a fan of one of the players, they're on screen the entire time. The next best game is StarCraft. And it's an immediate drop to 50% of screen time, right? It's either 100% in a fighting game, 50% in an RTS, because assuming the observers are jumping around back and forth equally between both players. And then you keep going down, right? Like if you're if you like one player on a Counter-Strike team, you're gonna get, what is that?
It's a team of 5, right?
10%. 10%.
Yeah.
You might get 10% action time on your player. You get a battle royale where you're like, hey, I like this one player on this one team. You might watch the entire season and never see a POV of that person, right? So it's really tough to build storylines around people who identify with a player or a team. Sometimes you'll be watching, like, I'm a huge PUBG fan. I play it all the time with my friends. I think what they're doing with PCS and PUBG esports is phenomenal. Shout out to Sims and Pansy, best casters. I think that it's super tough if you tune in and you're like, I really like this one player on Panda Gaming, right? You're watching the match. The commentators are talking about this firefight that's happening, and up in the top right corner, you just see 4 kills from a vehicle that just blew up, and that was your person. Your favorite person just died off camera. And you're like, well, The Hunger Games would have been a terrible movie if they're following Katniss around and she just dies, and they're like, oh, it turns out that wasn't the main character. Let's pivot over here and follow somebody else now, right? Like, Battle Royale is such a difficult to broadcast genre. I think, with a game like Fortnite, when you add in building and all this other stuff, it becomes even crazier and harder to follow. I think PUBG has done so much with the client. They've done so much with how you broadcast Battle Royale to sort of... they've gotten to the point where they're telling a coherent story around a game, which is just inherently almost impossible to tell a coherent story around.
It thrives in chaos.
Yeah.
That's what a battle royale pretty much is.
Yeah.
And the chaos gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it's the most chaotic at the end.
Yeah.
Well, looking at the success of people that have really launched or grown their careers with battle royale, like Ninja, who is an amazing Halo player who we worked with in the Halo days. Dr. Disrespect, who just thrives on YouTube 3 days a week. So these are the guys that people watch. Like that's the story, is how much of a personality and going through with them. And that's why they were able to create these giant brands. So how can an organization trying to put on a PUBG event or a Fortnite event or a Call of Duty Warzone event, can they compare? Even looking at the business monetary breakdown of a budget of putting on an event that's going to get a fraction of the numbers compared to a Dr. Disrespect or a Ninja.
I think their job isn't to try to match those numbers so here's the thing, right? Like, I was talking about how content creators break down into one of two, there's a lot of like caveats here, but generally content creators break down into one of two categories. You're either a personality streamer or you're a gameplay streamer. What I mean by that is Dr. Disrespect is clearly a very, Guy Beam puts on this show where he's this very over-the-top character, and people watch for the personality, right? Mm-hmm. He could whiff every single shot ever and just come up with zany excuses as to why he's, you could blame Alex or whatever. You could, but he also happens to be pretty good.
Yeah.
So he kind of straddles the line in an interesting way. I think folks like Ninja and Shroud straddle the line in kind of interesting ways. But there are some phenomenal gameplay streamers out there, which are they are landing nutty shot after nutty shot. They're doing 180 no-scope headshots, and they're so boring. They're like the Joe Biden of gaming. They're so milquetoast.
Come on, Jack.
They're just so insufferably boring to watch. But their viewers don't care because they came to watch the nutty shots. And there's some and the other side of the content creation is the people who are just hilarious. They're super funny, or they just do great commentary and they engage their community super well, and they've got all these different things going on, and they whiff all their shots. People either watch a stream for personality or for gameplay, and the very few cream of the crop content creators that can do both are where sort of you get lightning in a bottle. It's the Dr. Disrespects. Shroud to a lesser extent. I originally just watched Shroud for nutty shots because, former CS pro from Cloud9, Mike Grzic's he's a phenomenal shot. He's just a really great gamer. And when he first got into streaming, he was really boring to watch. And I don't mean any disrespect, but I think he just hadn't quite figured out how to be a performer in addition to, like, a performer on camera in addition to a performer in game.
Yep.
But he has actually come a super long way. He's really come into his own with like a nice, great, dry sense of humor. His chat interactions are phenomenal, and I think he's really stepped up to the plate lately. So I think he's definitely now there as well. Obviously, Ninja, has become just a crazy superstar in gaming. I've always thought, I've met Tyler a few times at Halo events and stuff at ESL. Super nice guy. Mm-hmm. Everything they say about him is true. Very friendly, lovely human. He was kind of boring to watch when he first started streaming because he was, a phenomenal gamer, like one of the best shots ever. But just kind of hadn't figured out how to amp up the entertainment aspect.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what happened, but it was like overnight he sort of went from like quiet gamer, just performing and executing. I mean, executing, like literally just executing people on the map. But then something happened overnight and he was just like, oh, I'm just going to turn on this like superstar charisma quality and just take over the world.
Yeah, and he did.
Yeah.
And now he's got a deal on Twitch again, so he and Shroud are back on Twitch.
Yeah.
What a crazy roller coaster that was. Having worked at Mixer and seeing what was happening behind the scenes and being like, oh, that's a decision to make. Okay. Oh, they don't exist anymore in 8 months.
You know what I'm really bummed about is it was very clear that, unfortunately, Mixer shuttered amidst a lot of things that were ongoing, including the current global health pandemic. And I think that they had, I don't know, I don't work at Mixer, I don't have friends at Mixer that squeal, but it feels like they were building towards something. Like I would have been really unsurprised to see some really cool, awesome plans at a lot of the things that got canceled, GDC, E3, that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, all those events got canceled. And I think Mixer they saw the writing on the wall and they said, you know what, if we just spent a bunch of money, like I feel so bad for the marketing teams that probably spent 10, 12, 14 months building up these massive programs that were going to execute and like come to fruition at these events, and the event get canceled and they're like, what are we going to do? Just live stream this thing from the Mixer studios, which is like, it's a great facility. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you were planning to blow the doors off of E3, there's no other place to do that but E3.
Yeah.
And that carpet got yanked out from underneath you. And I think, unfortunately, Microsoft had to make some tough calls, which...
Yeah, I understand, again, from the business sense of it, having gone through a number of different companies and projects that have folded, and understanding the end of the day, you can't keep operating in the black. And so when Mixer first started, they had a core group of people that they hired from different walks of life, but all pretty much gamers, and they set out to create some great content, original content, and build the channel, build the network. But you're competing against everything, not just Twitch and YouTube. You're competing against people playing games, watching television, watching Netflix, Hulu. Like, there's so much to compete against. So when you have that on top of a pandemic, it's tough to grow those numbers.
Right.
So even though we had our original content and our wonderful programs that were paying players every week for this digital arcade that we came up with, and the top 10 were flown to E3, awesome program. They didn't want to continue in that realm. Instead, they wanted to attract viewers from Ninja and Shroud over to their platform, and they spent a lot of money, millions of dollars, to make that happen. That doesn't work. You can't guarantee that audience is going to come over because you've created a chore for them. But I understand the business mechanics of we have to do something. So I wish if I could go back in time that they would have done both, but split the cost. Have Ninja or Shroud come over and have them spearhead the tournaments that we're doing so that we have a spokesperson that is recognizable, and have that be a year-long project.
Yeah.
To build it. But unfortunately, they didn't have the runway for it. So a lot of great people at Mixer, smart people over there. Not everybody on the executive side. I won't name names, but I felt comfortable working with the people in the trenches. And that was Lennox and the sound guys and my associate producers, Ish and Taylor. I would work on a show with them any time of the week again.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is the most heartbreaking part of it, is that we had a really awesome team that was doing their best with what they had.
Oh, anytime I hear about something like, the Blizzard layoffs or the Mixer shuttering or anything like that, I immediately just identify with the humans that are going to be impacted by that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, does Mixer, the website closing, affect me? No, but I feel really bad for all the Mixer partners that are now forced to either find a way to transfer over to Facebook Gaming. They had like a transfer deal with. Maybe they try to go back to Twitch. I think coming from Mixer to Twitch is really tough because in a lot of ways, you're now like, you might like the overall viewer base on Mixer was pretty well understood to be a lot smaller than Twitch.
Yeah.
And even if you were the biggest fish on, there's like Seif and there's a couple other guys, Seif. There's a couple huge Mixer streamers that now end up. No wait, Seif was on Facebook. He was already on Facebook. Anyways, there's a ton of content creators that don't have a home now, and those are the people I immediately cared about. I cared about the people in Mixer Studios. I care about the humans that are attached with it. Like, at the end of the day, does Microsoft need a robust streaming platform to remain a solvent business model? No, Microsoft is doing just fine.
Nope, exactly.
They did not need a media player. They did not need the Zune, because without the Zune, they're doing fine.
That's true.
I don't give any spare clock cycles in my head or heart to the business apparatuses that fall apart. It's got to be about the humans, on the other side of it. I was really interested to hear you talk a little bit about the folks at Mixer being gamers, because this is a thing that I've kind of always wanted to talk about, and I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on it. One thing that we experienced when we worked at ESL was most people at ESL were gamers who learned how to do their business function secondary, right?
I knew this was going to come. I can't wait to talk about this. Yeah.
And to me, that's the best way to do it, right? Like, as a World of Warcraft player, if my guild says, hey, we know that you've mained Warrior for 14 years. Warriors are in a pretty bad spot right now. Would you mind swapping over to Blood DK or Brewmaster Monk to tank? I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like, what do I have to do? Watch a YouTube video, like make a spreadsheet? Deal. Easy. Not a big deal. If you are playing Overwatch and, nobody wants to pick support, right? You're like, fuck it, I'll go support, right? Like, gamers are hard-coded in our DNA to learn how to do a new thing. Even if we don't know how to do it, we know how to do it, right? Like, we are so self-actuated self-starters when it comes to learning how to do stuff in video games. Like, you ask a gamer to go learn how to, like, woodwork or something, they might look at you funny. But if you say, hey, I need you to learn a new operator, or like, hey, our opera can't make it to this CS match, can you fill in for us? You go, I never op, but sure, whatever, right? Like, gamers will always go out of their way to learn how to do new things, right? Like, you see this, like, every content creator out there, that especially gaming content creators, they're so bootstrappy. It's like, oh, well, I need to make a highlight reel. What do I need to do? I need to go watch a bunch of tutorials about After Effects. I need to make myself, like, animations, and I need to learn video editing, and I need to learn this, and I need to learn how to Photoshop my own graphics, and I need to go buy an SM7B and learn about audio hardware. I need to learn what f-stops are on cameras, because I need to light myself appropriately. And they will literally go learn 19 professions, at least at enough of an amateur level that they can do all these things competently. And I think a lot of people stepping into the esports space recently, all of these, like the Vens of the world and all these other folks, they go to Hollywood and they say, we need a producer, and we need a director, and we need a cameraman, and we need an audio guy, and we need all these different roles. And they go find people that do that first, and they try to teach them video games. And that formula does not work.
Amen.
It occasionally can, but by and large, it's so much easier to teach a gamer how to be an audio engineer, or to teach a gamer how to point a camera at some talent. It's like, the best directors that I've ever worked with in esports have only directed esports. They've never, like, you could get somebody that directs, the Olympics or the Grammys, and try to get him to direct a Rocket League show. He's not going to know what the hell's going on. You have to, like, the best production lines in esports are gamers that are just getting it done.
Yeah.
Right. That's how it started. Like, every early esports production was just a bunch of gamers, and it was like, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of when I started my first band in middle school. It was like, hey, let's start a band, and somebody was like, I call drums, and somebody else was like, I'll be the singer that plays guitar, and I was like, I guess I'll do bass. And none of us had ever touched a single one of those instruments before. Actually, our guitarist was like taking lessons, so but like, none of us knew what we were doing. It was just we want to be in a band. These are the things that we need to be in a band. So one of us will learn how to play drums. One of us learn how to play bass. One of us will learn how to write songs. And we're just going to fucking get it done. And that's how all esports started. So anybody that's out there that's like, oh, we've got this guy who directed, like, people are trying to get like Marvel producers to come in and make esports. I'm like, how the fuck are those related? Like, that is not related. The skill sets don't translate well.
And who's going to benefit? Not the players. All the budget's going to go to production and to the executives' pocketbooks.
Right.
It's not going to go to the players who sacrifice everything, and if they lose, they get nothing.
Yeah.
What are we doing? Yeah, dude. I mean, amen.
I think it's one of the reasons that I really loved working at ESL is because that was very much true. Especially around when you and I worked there.
Yeah.
I know you left a little earlier than I did, but
probably about 6 months, 8 months before you did.
But the level of passion for gaming was always the DNA that held that place together. And to everybody's credit, everybody became subject matter experts on the things that they needed to really, really fast, right? Even from project management on down. I mean, there's a couple ancillary services, like accounting doesn't necessarily need to be pro gamers or anything like that, but having an audio engineer who's a gamer, he knows, people don't care about in-game music. Like, I'm going to disable that because we're going to run our own music on top of program. We're going to do whatever, right? Like, the graphics folks, like underneath the sea level, basically, you don't need to be a subject matter expert. I think that senior leadership absolutely needs to know proper management techniques and things like that. But in a lot of ways, gamers are great at that stuff too. Like, if you're a guild master and a raid leader in World of Warcraft, if you're an in-game leader in a tactical FPS, I think that you ultimately probably have the skills that you need to know to correct actions that need to be corrected. I think that a lot of the managerial skills are actually pretty inherent to gaming as well.
Yeah, there's
certain genres, anyways.
There was such a beautiful atmosphere that we had at ESL for a number of years, is because it kind of was the who's who of who wants to push their career and to push this scene and to do it in Burbank. And I'm very, very grateful for the projects that we got to work on, the different ideas that we got to bounce back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I'll always treasure that time. But it got to a point for me where there was a disconnect from the upper echelons of management, which are trying to bring new investors and they're pumping out numbers, compared to, hey, we shouldn't have any shows longer than 3 or 4 hours, period, because that's the human body is not going to tune in for all that stuff, right? We need to ring some stuff in. And my background was acting, theater, film, classical, so to take my experience from what I learned from that realm, going to college, getting a degree for that, and adding it to my passion of gaming and esports was to advocate, okay, let's do it this way. Okay, we need to have rehearsal and we need to do vocal warm-ups. All these things that other commentators, I've never done this before. And I go, well, do it because you're going to notice a difference. And they did. Yeah. So injecting knowledge and wisdom from performance overall, definitely useful for any type of production, especially esports. But if you do not understand the tone of what the event is, which is the game, that's the core of it, you're not going to fit in. Or if you don't defer to somebody who understands the tone, if you are an Emmy award-winning producer, project manager, etc., and you don't defer to, hey, should we have a commercial break here? The person says, no, we need to be live for an hour, period, because that's what the audience expects. That give and take is, I feel, how ESL was able to grow so quickly and pave the way for a lot of clients to show them this is what a show should look like with the budget that you have. But it evolved because more and more clients, in my opinion, started to realize, okay, great, that's how to do it. Cool, we're going to do it in-house now.
Right. In a lot of ways, ESL North America specifically, the Burbank office was really more of a testing ground where people could do proof of concept. It was, hey, is this a good idea? Let's hire some people that know what they're doing. If it's a good idea, we'll know it. And then if it is, we'll bring it in-house, which, fundamentally worked for quite a few of our clients. And I think it was always understood that might be that might be the reality. I think there were definitely some super happy folks that kept coming back because they realized, we can do this in-house, but we've not to name names. One of the clients I worked with the most when I was at ESL had this cycle where they would hire us to do a bunch of stuff at one of their events, and then the next time they did the event, they wouldn't hire us. And it would, because I don't want to say got cocky, but they would see us do it and we made it look effortless. And that was on, like, I'm not taking any of the credit for that. It was the teams that were in place to execute a lot of these live events would do it flawlessly. I was just making budgets and making the numbers work. I was just doing project management. But the next event, they would say, oh, that was effortless. Look how easy they made it look. And then they would try to do it in-house, maybe go with another contractor that was a little bit cheaper, and they didn't bring neither the in-house team nor the other contractors that were like a slightly lower budget option brought the passion. Like the we are gamers would care about how good this is, right? Like the I'm trying to squeeze out every extra DPS I can mentality of the game, or the I'm trying to make sure that I, like, if I can perfect this guy and have a full health bar at the end, that to me feels better as a win than, you know, scraping by.
And the experience of knowing what problems to look out for ahead of time until they become a problem in the moment, you know?
Oh yeah, like the gaming community, especially the people who sort of go to third parties for services for live production, they don't know anything at all about key learnings. Like they just don't understand how much subject matter expertise can be a pivotal tool to consistently increasing and raising the bar for production. They said, that was great, we'll do it in-house, and then it's bad.
Yeah.
And then they go, oh, let's go back to them, and then it's great again. And they go, okay. And then they try to do it again, and it's bad. And it's like, you don't understand that the one variable that's changing here is the fact that you're going with people that are super, super passionate about this. I always say ESL, specifically the Burbank office's core business model was, I don't want to use that word exploiting because that's got really negative connotations, was capitalizing on passion, right? I almost said exploiting passion, but like it's really capitalizing on passion and like weaponizing it, because there were people that would pull 14, 16, 18-hour days on productions because they really gave a shit about making sure it was as good as it could be.
Mike Ulacki on every show that we were doing.
Mike,
if there's one person that deserves to be in the Esports Hall of Fame forever, it's Mike Ulacki.
Yeah. Oh,
he's half the reason esports even exists.
You saw they named a room after him, right?
Yes. I saw that. He deserves all the credit.
The whole building should just be called the Mike Ulacki building.
Yeah.
You know, never before have I met somebody that has just so much expertise in their field. I think Mike is going to go down in history as ESL's best hire of all time. And I think he came from the ESS side of things.
The NASL side. Yeah.
What a legend. One thing I love about Mike was anytime I had a problem to solve or a question to answer on the tech side of things, I'd walk back to the engineering department. I'd be like, hey, Mike, like, we're trying to do this. I want to know if this is possible, and it's totally fine if you say no. But never once did I hear Mike say no. Mike would always go, he's like, it could work. And sometimes it could work. Do you have $500,000? Because it was, you need to rent a Grass Valley 192 input switcher. Jeez. And it's like, you know, that's the solution. And I'm like, okay, all right. So just, that's a no then. But Mike was so creative when it came to his solutions to technical problems that nobody else was dealing with at the time. You know, like there were times when we're like, hey, we want to run a 100-player battle royale event. We want to take a video input from every single game, you know, so we can do a direct capture from that instead of using the in-game spectator mode. We also want to do a program record off of every single video game output. And can we also get like a webcam for each player? So it's like, that's 300 video inputs you've just discussed. And Mike's like, we'd probably find a way to do it. I'm like, I don't think the Olympics has 300 video inputs. That's insane. Just such a smart guy that could always find a creative solution around anything.
Yeah,
so
absolutely, man. I miss having meetings with him and going over stuff way in advance. But like, all right, let's try to figure out any problems ahead of time, right? Technically, but half the problem was making sure gear was secured for the different shows because we were doing so much different stuff.
Yeah.
And to try to keep tabs and all those things, man.
I wish we could have put like an odometer on some of those flight kits and just see how many miles we racked up. You know, just sending that gear all around the country.
My goodness. Well, what do you think is going to happen in the future? I feel that ESL, when it comes to stadium events and Counter-Strike and Dota outside the international, that's the company to do it. You know, and their sister company's DreamHack.
Yeah. Not even sister company now. They merged.
They merged now? Okay.
Which is awesome. I when I was at ESL, you know, we worked with the DreamHack guys quite a bit.
I still haven't been to a DreamHack. I need to go to one. I know.
You got to go.
I got to go. But the sensibility really was to push the envelope, to push the scene and to make a global business out of it.
Yeah.
But do you like, what do you feel ESL fits now and in the future? Because my biggest issue, and they'll even tell us this, is that they have to have owned content. And pretty much all the content that they run is based off of video games that they don't have ownership to, right?
Yeah. So my answer is going to be colored a little bit differently based on the fact that I was onboarded and started ESL on the agency team, which is essentially white label services.
Yeah.
Everything we did, nobody knew it was ESL doing it. We didn't put our logos on anything. I mean, sure, there was like stickers on like some headsets occasionally and stuff.
Or a T-shirt or two.
Yeah,
and you're like, hey, man, all black, please. Okay.
Show blacks. But so coming from, I started doing white label work there for a really long time, and it was super fun. I got to work with some of the best clients that are out there. In a lot of ways, I do think that like first party O&O, like owned and operated stuff for ESL, is definitely the right path forward. It's like Counter-Strike events are absolutely their standout. Like they do CS. Like you can find the biggest naysayers in the world that like to sort of dunk on ESL whenever there's a problem, but they all shut their mouths when it's ESL 1 and IEM time, because like Katowice, it's ESL 1 New York, like gosh, those events, IEM Oakland, like they're all
Brooklyn Beatdown, man.
Yeah, oh my gosh, like the ESL 1 owned and operated mega events for stuff like Counter-Strike specifically are, bar none, I think some of the most electrified I've ever felt in a crowd.
Absolutely.
They know how to build that sort of passion. They know how to build, like, ESL always says we are esports, and even though I'm not a part of that we anymore, like I still believe that ESL is esports when it comes to like raising the bar in production quality. There's certainly a ton of folks that have really put ESL to task to constantly innovate. There's a lot of other production partners in the space that are stepping up their game and sort of, innovating in a lot of ways that ESL has to go, oh, how did they do that? We got to start thinking about how we're going to do that too, because it was a really great idea. One thing ESL has done really, really well over the last few years is pivoted super strongly into the mobile gaming space. They do a ton of the content for PUBG Mobile. They've done a ton of other mobile game content, and we kind of joked about it earlier, like, oh, do you want to count mobile gaming? I think as mobile devices get stronger and stronger, I talked about how I didn't passionately sort of buy into the appeal of VR esports early on.
Sure.
I'm just as skeptical about mobile esports, but if anybody's going to do it, it's ESL for sure. With such a strong technical team leading the charge, Mike Gulacki laid a lot of foundational groundwork for the tech of how you capture mobile devices at high frame rates, about how you do all this stuff, about how you set up the productions. And I think that ESL is really crushing it in the mobile space. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do a lot of that stuff too. Even white label, I don't think that white label is a 4-letter word to ESL. I think they're totally down to do stuff outside of sort of the ESL branded owned content. But I think that is their number one core competency, is those like Counter-Strike events, and I don't think you're ever going to see that stop.
Yeah.
And because it's what keeps them on the map so consistently as like a premier production partner. And then I also think that you're going to see them continue to push the envelope for mobile gaming as well.
Okay. Within the whole landscape of the paradigm shift with the virus, now we have potential vaccines on the way. There's still going to be a harsh winter. What do you think is going to change the most when a convention is going to be announced? And when do you think that convention would be announced? In 2021? I don't think anybody's going to feel comfortable until 2022 to be in a room with more than 1,000 people. But this is from like a business not getting sued type of standpoint, not an individual decision.
I think that in places that are handling it well, you might see an event. I would be unsurprised if I saw something like an IEM Australia. They had IEM, was it Sydney? Where did they do the IEM in Australia? It might have been Sydney. Well, if it wasn't Sydney, it's probably Melbourne. But
one of the two.
But Australia's gone like 16 days now with no new reported cases. So they've essentially squashed this, and they have a population that is begrudgingly willing to sacrifice for the greater good to make sure they squash this thing, right? Like if we had taken it seriously and everybody just quarantined super hardcore for a month when this thing first started, we'd be like Australia. We'd be in the clear now. It was people not taking it seriously, people, saying, all right, I'll wear the mask, but then you've got, Karen kicking a shit fit over here in the aisle at Target because she's being asked to wear a mask. I was like, would you have planted a victory garden and donated scrap metal and lined up on the odd side of the street to get gasoline and during World War II? It's like, come on, like what happened to the America that used to make a small sacrifice for the greater good? We're dumb. I think that's
that's it, man. We are dumb.
I think that you could get a place like Australia to host an event in like Q3, Q4, 2021, because they have no cases. I think it's all going to come down to what are the international travel protocols? What do local experts advise? Really the answer is when we're ready. I don't think any company certainly not a company as big as ESL, is going to volunteer to be the canary in the coal mine, right? Like nobody wants to be like, hey, let's try to have an event, see what happens.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, we killed a bunch of our fans. Like that's
yeah,
it's bad PR, it's bad business. I don't think they're going to try to do anything stupid too early.
Well, whenever the world is ready, what would you like to see changed within the whole ecosystem of events? Were there, to me, having worked on a number of different projects, been a project manager for almost every single major esport title, or hosted or been a part of it from either NASL, MLG, ESL, or on my own, it was too much for me to handle to keep tabs on everything, right? So I'm like, I'm just going to focus on fighting games and just focus on pretty much Mortal Kombat NetherRealm, but keep tabs here and there how things are doing. That is just for my own sanity and for what I want to build for myself. Do you think there were too many events and too many conventions, or is this just back into stop treating games like gamers like a monolith, and it's great to have all these different things going on?
I think the number of gaming events or esports events is not problematic. Never has been. I think the number of events for the same title was problematic. I know that it's the reason that ESL started WESA. There was just so much overlap within the Counter-Strike competitive calendar where teams were burning out. They were traveling constantly. They never had any downtime. They didn't get to see their families. They were just, they didn't know what country or time zone they were in. They were just as match. And I think that that's super unhealthy for the scene. I think that what's nice about things like that, like schedules that are that dense, is it does force the top teams to choose which events they go to in a much more structured way. Unfortunately, any profit-driven org is going to try to whore their team out as much as they can and try to compete everywhere, because even last place pays money. You make money if you go up and you lose every round, right? But it still might not be worth it to tax your players that much, which is nice. It does give the up-and-coming sort of farm teams towards like the Pro League another opportunity. Things like Mountain Dew League were a great opportunity for ESL to sort of give those up-and-coming teams more opportunities. I can really kind of only speak towards the Counter-Strike scene. I think overall, I would love to see a world in which event calendars for esports lined up more like traditional sports seasons, where people had downtime, they could rest and recover. And then in that downtime, that's a great opportunity for people to, go hug their kids that they haven't seen, where esports is graying to the point where most casters, most players, have kids, they've got families. They're trying to have a little bit of downtime. I would love to see compensation for talent and players get better to the point where people don't feel the need they have to go every weekend and cast an event, because if they don't, how are they going to make their mortgage? One thing I always tried really hard to do was make sure that prize money was paid out in such a way where I don't think the last place team should be making under minimum wage. These people are putting in 40, 60, 80 hours a week of training and practice and travel and all this stuff. And then at the end of the day, it's like, it's like, how much did you actually win? And it's like, you'd be better off working at Starbucks,
Yeah. Even on your own mental health.
It's not as fun working at Starbucks.
Yeah, sometimes you got to deal with some unruly people, but the amount of sacrifice that you put in and the heartbreak of losing or not making any money whatsoever. I saw that a number of times with fighting game players when I knew, okay, everybody that makes it to top 16 is getting paid.
Yeah.
Period. Or if it's only the top 8, then make it to the top 8. You're getting something for your efforts, and I feel that's very, very important. The ecosystem right now it's in such a flux. I mean, the amount of money that I had come in from my own business for hosting and producing and side gigs was a significant amount last year that I could pay off some debt. Now I'm back in debt. So it's difficult, but reflecting on how things could be better, how events could be better organized throughout the entire year, I feel like the answer could be a centralized organization, which is what WESA was trying to do, to try to centrally organize it. But to me,
you're supposed to say WESA, because when you say WESA, it sounds too
WESA.
Jar Jar. It's
WESA named Jar Jar Binks. Yeah, WESA. Pardon me. Within the conversations that I'm having with people over in the NetherRealm scene with Injustice and Mortal Kombat, we need a calendar that showcases what happens for the month, what tournaments are happening when. And we had this Facebook group where we could line up what events were happening. Like when I was doing stuff for ESL, I'd put in that calendar going, hey, our finals are going to be this weekend, so nobody else would plan any other finals. Worked pretty well to organize that way within that group. This organization, though, to me, when I even say it out loud, almost sounds like it should be a union.
Yeah.
Do you think a union, we're mature enough now to have a union, and do you think that would have a positive impact on, I mean, we need one for the gaming scene in general, period. But just even for like Counter-Strike. If Counter-Strike had a players union or organization, do you think that would be a positive effect, and how so?
I pretty firmly believe that any labor organization in general is going to result in overall net gain for the people that are involved in that labor organization. It's definitely a nuanced response per game. If you're going like does the entire gaming industry need a union versus does Counter-Strike need its own union? I think that ultimately,
or we could use another word, a commission.
Sure.
If not a union, commission for Counter-Strike.
The esports space very specifically has this problem where, outwards towards investors and sponsors, the messaging is, we're grown up, we're big boy esports now, like we are fully professional, like you can look under the hood, like there's nothing wrong. Please come give us money. And then when casters and players ask, hey, can we not all share like double rooms with each other where like somebody's asleep on the floor? They're like, well, we're not quite at big boy esports level yet. We're gonna have to be scrappy about it. And
oh my God, you know how many times you find out that you're not only in a double bed, but there's one bed and you have to share the bed, so you put the chastity pillows between you so you don't roll over each other. Yeah.
In a lot of ways, I think that companies like ESL are trying to accelerate that professionalization of esports productions and broadcasts. But ultimately, until the money from outside actors like investors and sponsors comes into big events, I think there's always going to be a need to sort of find margin at the margin. And you're always going to see people trying to cut corners. Like when you talked about doing events, and one of the reasons you left ESL was you're like, hey, we really can't do broadcasts more than 3 to 4 hours long. That's really all people are in for. The former project manager in me was like, we paid all this money to get all these people here, and then we're only going to use them for half the day. I was like, that's such a drain on the finances, and like, how do you make those numbers work? Ideally, if you've rented a space and you've got all the gear here and you've got all these humans here, you want to do a 10-hour broadcast. You want to stop at 9 hours and 59 minutes so nobody goes into, union OT if you're shooting in California. But it's the reason why 1-day long events aren't as financially sound as 3-day events, because it becomes infinitely more efficient, right? Like your dollar per broadcast hour becomes more efficient the longer that the event is, because you've got shipping and you've got travel for everybody. If you travel to an event and you leave the next day, you bought 2 flights for 1 day of broadcast versus getting 3 full days of, like, the dollars spent per content hour becomes much better for longer events, longer broadcasts. And I think ultimately, some sort of commission or union could really help. I think it's important that it has to, like, I'm all about understanding and acknowledging the business realities of the situation. Like, I'm not going to try to force a production to lose money. Yeah. But you have to understand, where is their money being made? What are the knobs and dials and levers of monetization? How are those revenue streams working? And if we don't find better revenue streams, we certainly need to streamline the production and try to lean things up a little bit. But ultimately, nothing can be at the expense of the health or financial security of the human beings. Like I said, it's about the humans, right? Yeah. Like when Mixer shuttered, I didn't care about Microsoft's bottom line. I cared about the humans, and I think that always has to be paramount. I absolutely think that some sort of organized labor movement within gaming or esports could be the right way forward to making sure that those conditions continually improve, because they're not where they need to be right now.
Yeah. Well, we try to improve upon the best of both worlds, right? Having that convention feel where it's a long day, plenty of things are happening, you're broadcasting, but the finals, the major event, should be that tight 2, 3, 4 hour show, at the end of the day. And it just comes down to human nature, and what you expect from your audience. Going to MLG events that were 3 days long, a lot of fun, a lot of action, a lot of storylines that developed. But when you're only getting paid $200 for the whole weekend and you're completely burned out, it's like, how many more things do we have to do like this until we start to improve? Right? And that was always the difficult part, where it's that carrot kind of being dealt out in front of you. Oh, do another one and we'll be able to pay you more next time. And they tell you that over and over again. You start to realize, when is this going to improve, right? It's a difficult place to be.
Yeah.
Because you want to build your career and build a repertoire and build your brand, but still know when you're being taken for a ride or when to stand up for yourself.
Yeah, I think we're actually seeing this a lot now, specifically on the talent side of things in the Valorant scene, where people are really interested in sort of being the Valorant talent, right? Like when you think about talent for StarCraft, you think of Tastosis, you think of Rotterdam, and you think of like all the greats of StarCraft. And it's a handful of maybe 10, 12, maybe 14 people. And you're like, that's the broadcast talent for StarCraft. Counter-Strike's kind of the same way. League, Overwatch, you've got these iconic personalities that are regularly the face of this. And we don't have that for Valorant. A lot of Counter-Strike people are trying to move into it. A lot of Rainbow Six Siege folks are trying to come into it because they're like, it's tactical first-person shooter, kind of the same thing. But people are so hungry to be all the up-and-coming casters that want to be an esports caster, and that's their passion and their dream. They're doing Valorant gigs for free because they want the exposure, and it undercuts the scene a lot because it means that production companies are learning that they don't have to pay talent because they'll do it for free. And it's like when you try to like hire an artist to commission a piece or something, and you're like an influencer, you see those horror stories where people are like, oh, we'll pay you an exposure, and it's like a lot of the Valorant talent are like actively doing this to themselves. It's like, no. Exposure, you cannot deposit exposure in your bank account. It will not keep your lights on. Do not work for exposure. Work for industry standard rates. And unfortunately, we don't really have industry standard rates for broadcast talent for esports. I think that each game sort of, like the StarCraft talent, the Counter-Strike talent, they obviously all talk and they're like, how much you get paid, how much you get paid. And those numbers sort of equalize into a relatively like similar strata, but I think Valorant's the Wild West right now. And I think unfortunately a lot of these people are people who haven't found a home as a caster yet, and they are doing themselves such a disservice. And I think the scene's going to struggle for a long time to get competitive rates. It's
so frustrating because we learned these lessons over 100 years ago with acting. You've heard of United Artists? That was the union that the artists got together and said, hey, guess what? If you want to use us on stage or on screen up in Chicago, you have to pay us this rate. You can't use children for longer than 3-4 hours. Like all of these things that helped that scene grow enough that they became a fully bodied group of people that then moved to California because they realized, oh, there's a lot of sunshine there and they finally have water down there. Yeah. And then that's how LA grew to the big film business that it is. But dude, I am very sad to hear that people are still willing to do stuff for free. You're absolutely right. It undercuts all of the hard work and establishment that many people throughout this scene have been doing for the last 10 years. I had an agent, Tobias Sherman, Tumba. Didn't work out between us. He also represented Tasteless and Artosis. Didn't work out between them. Having an agent advocate for you to make sure you are being paid more, or to go to bat for you, that's how it works in Hollywood. But to try to introduce that in the esports world, especially in the MLG days, MLG's like, we're not going to pay you more money. We're not going to pay you more money. He was able to go to bat for me and got me a little bit more money. He didn't take a percentage then, but then would take a percentage based on any other jobs that I would book. Cool. But the scene was too small. It was too small to have that type of agency representation at the time. Right. But there needed to be some sort of conversation happening where the talent needed to be paid a better wage all around as we saw the numbers grow. So that is one of the leadership roles that I try to maintain within my sphere of influence is anybody can come to me and ask what should be a fair rate for me as a production assistant, as a commentator, as an admin, because I go off the rates that I use at ESL. And those seem to be pretty fair rates for a lot of people. Yeah. That's very difficult, man. And
I think it's getting a little bit better now, but obviously Valorant came out during the pandemic, essentially, right? Yeah. Like it has been blowing up. People are really into it. I think that where the opportunity was missed was when Valorant came out and a bunch of talent were booking things. A ton of folks were brand new to Valorant. A ton of the aspiring talent. I mean, everybody was new to Valorant, but a ton of the aspiring talent there hadn't been broadcast talent before. They knew the game really well. They could speak about it clearly and articulately. They had a good microphone, and they're casting, grassroots tournaments. What they didn't do and what they should have done was go talk to some Counter-Strike talent and say, how much do you guys get paid?
Absolutely.
How much do you get paid for a grassroots event? How much do you get paid for a mega event? Like, what's the delta? Like, what should I be asking for? What's fair compensation? And unfortunately, it requires a pretty concerted, pretty uniform effort from all of the talent, because if one person goes low, everybody has to go low.
Mm-hmm.
It's the entire plot of the Grapes of Wrath, you know? It's literally just labor will consistently undercut itself until they start collectively bargaining.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many life lessons that we've learned, but people don't want to plumb those depths. It's like, oh, it's not gaming, so I'm not going to take anything from it. It's entertainment.
Yeah.
It's entertainment at the end of the day. So please take these life lessons that people have learned and adapt them and use them.
If you're an aspiring broadcast talent and you are looking for what is a fair market rate, reach
Boom.
out to Josh Gray on Twitter.
At
Mr. Joshua Gray.
That's right. At Mr. Joshua Gray, I will tell you straight up. And I know the top paid people in talent when it came to a show are the Dota talent people. Those people made 20 to 40 to 60K for that event. But that's a couple weeks of work. Yeah. So if people are like, well, who's getting paid the most? Dota people, from what I've seen. It's the Dota people.
I could say some names, but I'm not going to.
Hey, they're doing well for themselves. I mean, they had to navigate that entire world when Ice Frog and went over to Valve and decided to create that, and people went over. And I remember when I first played Dota 2, I'm like, oh man, it's like Warcraft 3, like the slower system compared to League of Legends, which you could turn faster and stuff, and just navigating that world.
I was a Heroes of New Earth guy.
Oh snap!
Han? Oh,
I remember that.
So much faster pace. I loved it as like a more action oriented guy. You said something I totally forgot about what I was going to talk about.
Oh, it's okay.
Brain fire.
It happens. Let's talk about the Game Awards. I was able to walk through or read through a lot of the nominations. Most of the games I haven't played.
I probably haven't played them either. I also didn't look at a lot of the nominations. So this is like, you're going to get my completely uneducated feedback.
All good. Well,
but I've probably got a lot of opinions.
So Game of the Year is like Ghost of Tsushima, Last of Us 2, oh my God, Doom, the Doom sequel. What was Doom Eternal? Animal Crossing New Horizons, and I believe there was one more. Ghost of Tsushima is the one that really speaks to me the most this year. In terms of multiplayer, I definitely got to tip my hat to Among Us, fighting game, Mortal Kombat 11 Ultimate. I'm biased, sure. But those are the categories, right? And there are a lot of different nominations for the Jeff Keighley show. I mean, the Game Awards. No, shout out to Jeff Keighley. Sometimes he gets in his own way, but I'm really happy that he spearheaded this project and reined it in away from Spike, who made it a little bit too cringeworthy on TV and decided to do it himself. So awesome.
Yeah, Jeff has done. He's one of the passionate gamers.
Oh
in
yeah,
the industry.
He's gone through a lot.
His passion for it is so evident. Like, it's almost painful. Not quite there. Like, you see Jeff on screen and you see his passion for this. You see him behind the scenes, like all the stuff he does off camera, like out of the season of preparation and production for it. And Jeff is he is a human being on a mission.
Yeah, I just wish that he would split the duties a little bit more, because I feel like he's juggling so much. As a producer that's also been on camera as the host, I feel with him. I'm like, oh man, I understand that you're trying to juggle so many things right now, and probably somebody's in his ear probably telling him to fill, and he's got to fill and stuff. So to launch something that's becoming so prestigious, I feel there's a lot of weight on him to make a great show, and he every year gets better and better and better. So kudos, Jeff. It's weird, man, because like most years there's a lot of game titles that I'll go through, or at least jump into some single player titles and whatnot.
Sure.
But this year has not really been a whole lot of titles that I've played. It's kind of odd.
I think it has a little bit to do with how much of a clown fiesta this year has been.
Yeah.
I am like the Last of Us #1 fan. I pre-ordered Last of Us 2 Collector's Edition, whatever. I started playing it last week because knowing Naughty Dog and knowing Neil Druckmann and knowing The Last of Us, I was like, this game's gonna be really depressing. It's gonna have some dark moments, and some of it was spoiled ahead of time for me. I just, unfortunately, like went down a Twitter rabbit hole and figured out a couple of the plot swings. But I was like, I am not in a headspace where I can play a Last of Us game right now. I can't have characters incredibly lovingly crafted with just like masterful storytelling and character building, I can't have those people die on me. Like I don't, and I know they're going to. It's a Last of Us game, of course, obviously. And so I was like, I literally need to wait until the election is over. I need to know like what path we're heading on, and then I can start playing The Last of Us. Because if I'm not going to play The Last of Us when I know we're signing up
or living it.
Yeah, exactly.
Signing up for a civil war. I had a good talk with Capitance, who was on my the podcast a couple episodes ago. I haven't played Last of Us 2. I'm not really planning on playing it because I didn't fully enjoy the first one. Mm-hmm. I respect and appreciate it, but I found the very end to be a little clunky, and then the misery porn of just like, damn, this is tough. So I didn't really feel compelled to go through it again. Now, if it's on sale at a later date, sure. But I felt like I couldn't express myself as to why I didn't want to play it because of those reasons. Right. But then the world would be like, oh, you don't want to play it because there's a trans character. And it's like, no, I want to see a trans person represented in games. It's great. I applaud it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
But if I don't feel like playing the game, or if it's not for me, and if I'm vocal about it, it's like, oh, you don't like because of this and that. I'm like, no, internet, it's not like, can we have some nuance and talk about this shit, So and it was tough for me to try to express that too, because I want to be authentic with how I feel about the game, but still support us moving forward in a progressive fashion.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So hopefully I've gotten really good at talking about Last of Us 1 and 2 without spoilers. The thing that really drew me in, that made me like the mega fan of Last of Us 1, was that they treated characters in a video game like no game previously had, or maybe just hadn't succeeded at, right? Like there's a scene in The Last of Us 1 where the character you mostly play as is physically restrained and unable to help a character that you are in a protective role of. And I remember I cracked my DualShock because I was like, they had done such a good job of making me feel like I was this character that was in charge of protecting this other character. And that, like, I felt a human connection to artificial characters. And I felt not just my connection to each of the characters individually, but I felt their connection to each other. They did such a good job of writing those characters. And when I'm physically restrained and unable to stop the character that I'm supposed to be protecting from being assaulted, I literally yelled out loud to myself alone in my living room. I said, "Don't you fucking touch her!" And I like cracked the controller, and I was like, "Oh my god!" I was like, I like paused, and I like had a little reflective moment. I was like, I treat these characters like humans that I know, right? They had done such a good job of writing the two characters up to that point where I was like, I get it now. Like when you hear those stories about moms like lifting cars off their kids, I was like, I fucking get it, because I was like ready to break my controller and my TV. I was like, I genuinely cared so much about being able to protect this character, and that's why I love Last of Us 1. They really built character in games that nobody had ever done before, in a way where it broke like the uncanny valley. I mean, like visually it was still there, but like mentally I was like, this is a person, and I know their name and their struggles and who they care about. And I like, no game had really ever tried to write characters at that level of depth before. And the ending of that game, to me, I was like devastated by the ending. But then after I sat with it for a couple weeks, I was like, oh, it made sense. Like it couldn't have.
Yeah, the decision that character makes the end,
it doesn't end like a Disney movie.
Yeah,
and
I appreciate it.
It couldn't have. If it did, it would have felt like a slap in the face after the last 30 hours I put into it. This is not a world of Disney endings, you know?
Yeah. But to me, after you switch from that character, again, not revealing too much, but you're that character for the majority of the game, then you switch to the other character just to climb a fence, and then the game ends or something like that. And I'm like, why? And then it makes sense now that there's a sequel.
Yeah.
But it just felt like a really odd epilogue for that moment in time. And now that you've described the way that you've experienced this game, has helped open my eyes a little bit more to what it's meant for you. But like, okay, damn, yeah, there were a couple moments where I felt protective.
There is one moment that's worth playing Last of Us 2 for sure.
Okay.
Even if you dislike everything else about it, there's one moment with a without giving anything away, I'll just say it's the birthday moment. There's a birthday moment, and I was like, fuck, man, this game.
Yeah,
they still have the characters down.
I'll definitely get to it. when it's on sale because I want to support the artists that put that together, even though it's tough because these artists are under duress. These video game teams are under duress with crunch and stuff, and it's like, oh, I don't want to support Naughty Dog because they crunch. It's like, well, at the same time, the people that crunched made this piece of art, so maybe they'd appreciate it if you did play it.
And they're doing it because of passion. Nobody, I don't want to say nobody. Very few people stick around at crunchy developers if they're not also passionate about the work.
True. I had a wonderful conversation with one of the developers at NetherRealm about this, where he's like, you have to have a healthy balance, sure, but when you're shipping a game, those weeks ahead of time, there's a lot of stuff you have to do. It's the same as when you release a movie, or if you have to get the final cut out to theaters, you are going through the edits and the sound like mad to launch it, because you're launching a big thing. But the cry is when it's based off of the investor's drive, and the investors are getting all of the benefit monetarily pretty much, while, oh, great job, everybody, we're going to cut 800 of you now.
Right.
Difficult waters to navigate, man. But
yeah, it doesn't sit well with anybody.
But again, unions could definitely help.
I'm a firm proponent of organized labor.
Nice.
One of my uncles is an electrician. I grew up in a pretty blue collar family.
Mm-hmm.
My
father construction, so same.
My dad construction, granddad construction. My mom and my brother are both nurses, so it's like 100%. Yeah, totally understand.
And being an artist is labor, a labor of love, but a labor all the same. So I look forward to you finishing the game, and then I'll eventually get to it, and we can talk all about it, off camera, which is.
Timo is playing through it right now, and we're just about at the same part. So
nice.
Him and I are gonna have a little powwow and.
I remember when Timo was really excited for the PlayStation 4 version of Last of Us being released, and how he was super gung ho and stuff playing it. I played it on the PS3. That's how long ago it was. The first one.
I played it on the PS3, and I played the PS4 remake as well. So.
Yeah. Are you going to get a new console? PS5, Xbox, both?
Oh, I'm playing it on a PS5 right now.
Gosh darn it! the day that PS5 went on for sale, I checked on Amazon, or I got an email from Sony going, "Hey, since you play on PlayStation, we're going to send you an email letting you know when you can pre-order." Great. And I also went to Amazon. We'll send an email, let me know when you can pre-order. Great. Nothing.
The trick. This is a trick for all. Great podcast listeners. The trick is pre-order the console, but select in-store pickup. Don't have them delivered to your house. And here's why. When you pre-order for online delivery, it's a number in a system somewhere. It's artificial inventory kept track of in a spreadsheet, completely irrespective of whatever physical units are available. I have many friends who pre-ordered a PS5, and the pre-orders have since been canceled. They're like, sorry, we don't know what happened to your console, because you didn't pre-order a physical console. You pre-ordered a number, and then that number was going to eventually get tied to a physical SKU somewhere.
Damn, okay.
When you pre-order for in-store pickup, the last thing they want is you showing up to Best Buy or Walmart or GameStop or wherever and screaming your brains out at some poor 16-year-old kid about where your fucking console is.
Yeah.
So when you pre-order for in-store pickup, that's actually tied to a piece of physical inventory. I pre-ordered for Best Buy. I walked in and I was like, here's my QR code. They scanned it and they went, here you go. I showed them my ID and I walked out. Didn't even have to, no interaction at the cash register because I prepaid. They scanned my thing. I showed my ID to show who I was picked up and walked out.
Dang.
So effortless.
Good to know.
You always in-store pickup. It's a little bit of extra work, and yes, I wore a mask, and it was like Best Buy was like they were taking the socially distancing thing super seriously, which is awesome.
I picked up my camera from there, and it was waited outside in line, and I actually went in the store after waiting in line, and hardly anybody's in the store. I'm like, I'd much rather do it this way. Yeah. Well, damn, man. Now I know for next time.
In-store
for sure.
pickup, especially for consoles.
Yeah.
Consoles specifically always do in-store pickup.
How do you like the PS5?
I love the new XMB. It's phenomenal. I love the interface. I hate the external design of it. It's so much bigger. It doesn't fit my entertainment system, so it's like standing up on the side. I got to buy a whole new thing for it. It's terrible. But I actually haven't played any PS5 games on it. I've just been playing through Last of Us Part 2, which is just a PS4 title, but it plays flawlessly on the 5. So
and the load times
are amazing.
Awesome.
Literally, like I turn the console off at night, and I don't do like sleep mode. I turn on my entertainment center, turn on the TV, I press the PlayStation button, and I'm like in Last of Us playing it, I think within 30 seconds from like console boot to like game is loaded, actively playing.
Dang.
It's snappy. It's nice.
That's what I look forward to the most whenever I'm able to pick up a PS5 is to load in Mortal Kombat 11 and see how quick I can just get into an online match after all the loading screens are done. Yeah. We're going to be telling the next generation a couple years from now. I remember back in my day we had to wait for loading screens to jump into the next level. What do you think is your favorite game this year, and what do you think will win Game of the Year or should win Game of the Year, even if it's not nominated?
It's a really tough question. I haven't been playing a ton of new games this year. I did play a little game called. Now I'm gonna blank on the name of it. It's like a tactical World War II game. Dang.
On PC?
It's on PC. It's on Steam.
Okay.
Dang, what is it called? Something 1941. I almost said Proletariat 1941, but that's not it. Anyways, that was really fun, short. I've been a huge fan of Destiny lately.
Okay.
You and I played Destiny 2 when it came out.
Yeah, we did.
On PlayStation.
I miss it. I always think about that conversation we had where, you keep playing the same levels, but it's the art of Zen. You perfect it, get those headshots.
The gameplay loop of shooting in Destiny, the shooting is just so consistently buttery smooth. I did download Destiny 2 on the PS5, which is not like the PS5 version yet.
Yeah,
that's coming later in an update. But it was running at 60 frames per second. Felt gorgeous playing Destiny on console at 60 FPS. I've been really bad at playing games lately.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think Last of Us 2 might be up there, but that's just because there's a real dearth of competitors in my mind because I haven't played a ton of titles yet.
Gotcha. Well, it's up there. It's up there being nominated. And I think Doom Eternal is definitely a contender for this year.
Yeah, Doom Eternal is really fun.
Really fun action game.
My buddy V gifted it to me on Steam. We always just gift each other games back and forth. He gifted it to me, and I just went hard on that game for a long time. It was a lot of fun. Again, shooting, the core gameplay loop feels very buttery smooth. They've done a great job with it.
Oh, yeah. I like playing my games on console at the moment, and I'm just glad that the controls feel great, on the Xbox for Doom. I'm sure they'll feel even better on a keyboard and mouse, but it's been quite some time since I played a shooter on a keyboard and mouse. Yeah. I think the one game that I need to play is Hades.
Oh, yeah. I think Hades is going to be Game of the Year.
Okay. I keep hearing nothing but even a guy at Yoga, until Yoga closed down again, but he's like, hey, man, have you played Hades yet? I'm like, no, I haven't, but I keep hearing about it.
Yeah.
So that's the one game I'm going to try to dive into over the Thanksgiving weekend of having just some alone time. And
yeah, it's the art style's phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's the same folks that did Transistor, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I played a little bit of Transistor. What was the one before then?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I played the hell out of that one, too. Deep Cut. I can't remember the name of it.
It had a real deep voice that narrated it.
Anyways, I know the one you're talking
Good
about.
indie games, but they keep growing more and more. I haven't played any Among Us, but what a great story that game is of being a small game for a long time on Steam for at least a year.
Yeah.
Over and then it blew up.
It was out for a while, and then it blew up, which is great for it. I feel like Fall Guys was on this meteoric rise. Yeah. Among Us came out of nowhere, but now I think people are getting back into Fall Guys a little bit. I've always been a firm proponent of making sure that people evaluate games based on the fun you have playing them, right? Like not graphics, not like, Far Cry 9 or whatever, like fully ray trace. Who cares, man? Like if you're having a blast playing it, it's a good game.
Yeah.
That's it. And I think Among Us is, it's essentially Werewolf or Mafia or any of these like,
fun party games.
You've got the party game where like a couple people are like the sneaky ones, like Secret Hitler. There's like a bunch of them like that. And it's just a great expression of that through the video game medium. And I think it's something people just sort of inherently understand. It's turned into a pretty big cultural phenomenon when you've got folks like Hassan and AOC playing it, It's like, I think overall, Among Us, it's tough to give a ton of accolades to Among Us as a game because so many of the systems are borrowed from existing things. I don't know that they've like really invented anything here, but they've reinvented it in a very interesting way, which, I think that certainly deserves kudos and accolades, but I don't know that the people that developed Among Us are like rocket scientists in game design. I think they're rocket scientists in social engineering.
Yeah. Well, it's like with Mario Party. It's not the craziest type of gameplay you've ever played, but it's a lot of fun. And that's what people would do offline back in the day on their Wiis. It's like, oh, we got Mario Party. Cool. Let's go.
The real party is the friends we made along the way.
That's the Kraken. We found out we were the Kraken all along. I the first time, or maybe the second time ever in my life, I jumped over at Reddit / r/conservative.
Yeah.
Because people were asking, hey, what's it like right there after this whole Sidney Powell thing's exploded? And they're like, oh, they're imploding. And you just see them going, it's over, folks. It's over. And then like, well, this is a great journey. We just turned out that we were the Kraken all along. Just all of this humor when it feels like, you're accepting defeat.
Yeah.
And I also liked the number of conversations people were having of like, it's time for us to move on. It's over. Let's move on. And some of them trying to, talk about the conservative ideals and values that they have. And it made me go, why can't we have conversations like this in person and get off these goddamn social media structures where I've even been guilty where I'll see somebody I disagree with and I'll retweet, be like, oh, this is a bad take. And they respond like, no, you're a bad take. But 2 or 3 times that's actually turned into a dialogue, and then they give their viewpoint, I give my viewpoint, and at the end I'm like, oh, thanks for the dialogue. I don't think it's healthy whatsoever where we're at. And just looking at that conversation on Reddit gave me a bit of a chuckle.
Yeah.
But it also reminded me of the goddamn nightmare that is Facebook and what that's turned into.
You know what's really interesting, if you want to dive into politics for a little bit.
Sure.
I was really... I'm a pretty unapologetic leftist. You know that about me.
Yep.
Nobody here does. But one thing that really set my mind at ease with how the popular vote turned out, I was a little disheartened to find that not only did all the previous Trump supporters come back to bat for him, but like, was it 6 million more?
Yeah. Every demographic was higher in voting for Trump except white men. That went down by 5 points or 8 points.
We learned a lesson.
Yeah.
But, it's tough to see his popular vote number rise and not think that's problematic because of the everything, you know? But what really gave me hope was in places where Trump won pretty handily, progressive ballot measures also won.
Exactly.
You look at a state like Florida, which passed $15 minimum wage. Not immediately, it scales up to that. I think it hits 15 in 2026. But increasing the minimum wage has been a long bastion sticking point for progressives. And I think it passed by 62% in Florida. The ballot measure to raise minimum wage $15 an hour passed by 62%. Trump won the popular by like 51%, right? Not a lot. So clearly the delta there tells us that a lot of conservative voters also came out to support a progressive ballot measure like $15 minimum wage. You look at, I think 5 states voted for more progressive drug legislation. Oregon, infamous at this point.
Yes, sir.
But then you've got places like, was it Mississippi?
Yeah.
Voted 76% in favor of legalizing medicinal marijuana.
Yep.
And a ton of other states, New Jersey doesn't count because they're already pretty progressive. But a ton of these states voted ballot measure-wise progressively and presidential candidate-wise conservatively. And all that tells me is that progressive ideals are a lot more popular than we think they are, but Democratic DNC selected candidates are not.
Amen.
And that to me tells a very clear picture, because when you've got so many folks that register as Republicans, they're self-professed conservatives, and they're willing to show up to the polls and vote overwhelmingly for Donald Trump, but then they also turn around and vote for, in Florida, the proposition, I think it was Prop 2, to raise minimum wage to $15 an hour was very viciously fought against by the Florida Republican Party. And it was very viciously fought against by all of the major Republican players in that state. It was fought against by conservative public radio. It was not public radio, conservative talk radio. All of the people saying vote for Donald Trump were saying don't vote to raise the minimum wage. And people went, we'll vote for Donald Trump, and fuck you, we're voting to raise the minimum wage. So I think what's super important there is that people must realize the minimum wage, a vote to raise the minimum wage, is voting in their own best interest. They've also just been convinced that voting for Donald Trump is a vote in their own best interest. And that's the formula. That's like the string on the fraying sweater the Democratic Party needs to pull on. Like the DNC needs to say, how do we reach these voters? I don't begrudge a Trump voter for voting for Trump if they think that they're voting in their own best interest. I think it's insane if somebody ever votes against their own best interest. But obviously, much like gamers should not be treated like a monolith, I also don't think you can treat a voter like a monolith. There are no single issue voters out there. I don't care what anybody says. Everybody's factoring. We are complicated, nuanced creatures. When you vote for somebody, you vote for personality, you vote for their foreign policy stance, you vote for their domestic, their whatever. I think that what the DNC is really failing to do is look at why angry, disaffected voters are thinking Donald Trump is the candidate who's going to vote in their own best interest. Most Trump supporters are voting economic insecurity, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've been told that the economic insecurity is the result of migrant caravans and, Muslims and whatever, right? All dumb xenophobic lies that prey on the darkest parts of the human psyche.
Yeah.
But they've been effectively tricked into thinking that, or I don't want to say tricked, that's a little too prescriptive. I think tricked, but
hoodwinked or baffled or bamboozled.
They've been effectively convinced that the reason...
Indoctrinated.
There we go. They've been convinced that the problems they face are the result of these others.
Mm-hmm.
And they should be angry that they are not doing well financially. They should be angry they're not doing well financially. We are in the richest country in the world. We have enough money that everybody can do well here. I think they've been redirected to be angry this way, whereas those on the left have been redirected to be angry at Jeff Bezos, right? And I think that ultimately what the DNC is failing to do is make a compelling argument that you're angry at the wrong people. And it's almost like the DNC's message is so off that they're chastising these people for being angry. And they should be saying, no, get angry, but get angry at the right people, right? Get angry at the inherent flaws in late-stage capitalism that have caused things to get to this point. Be angry that you can't pay your bills, but understand you can't pay your bills because these bills have increased while wages have not, right? And I think that where we overwhelmingly see progressive ballot measures passing, I can't stress enough how much that is the thread that the DNC needs to pull on. We need to look at the disaffected voter and say, why are you voting for them? They will not help you.
All the exit polls that I saw on election day painted a very clear picture that progressive policies are what the majority of Americans want in the 70 percentile.
Yeah. Did you see, this was still when Bernie was in the running for the primaries. There was a moment where he had a town hall meeting at Fox News, in the studios. And they did sort of a Q&A, and they had some people... I don't think they tried to pad the audience and make them overwhelmingly conservative. They just said, hey, who watches Fox News and wants to come? So it did skew that way. But they asked him some hard questions about socialism, and he sort of shooed away, like it's democratic socialism. We're really just talking about policies that would, under any other time period have fit well under, the New Deal or anything like that. We're really just talking about adopting programs they have in Canada and Finland and Sweden. Like it's not social. It's not big S scary.
It's not communism. Yeah.
Right. And he sort of brushed that away. And then by the end of it, they had asked him, or they asked the audience, they said, who would be down for a single payer healthcare system? And it's really interesting how the language you use about socialized healthcare is really important. If you say socialized medicine, it has like 42% public support. If you say universal healthcare, it's got like 70% popular support, even though it's the same thing. Medicare for all, is pretty popular as well. But they say how many people here would be interested in trying out a system like the senator is proposing. And everybody in the Fox studio is like cheering and raising their hands and like hooting and hollering. And I'm like, he went into the belly of the beast and converted these people because he was just talking about the policy, right? I think one of the reasons people are so reticent to vote Democrat while secretly liking a lot of those policies just has to do with like raw human tribalism. Most folks grow up in a household where you are handed your political party affiliation along with your sports team loyalty. You're gonna grow up under my house, you vote for the Republicans and you cheer for the Packers, and that's just the way it is. And people are just like, okay, Packers and Republicans, that's it. I cheer for the Packers and I vote Republican. And they are so ingrained because of like, this is like human behavioral problems where we cannot vote against the people who we identify as. And when you're a Republican voter, you're taught that you value, a certain subset of, small government, states' rights,
pro-life,
all these different things. And even if you disagree with some of those or even close to all of them, you're like, I am still a Republican, because that's such a core part of your identity, right? Like you can have something so progressive like minimum health or minimum wage being increased, and you're like, I am a Republican, but I also make less than $15 an hour, so I will vote for that, because I am going to vote in my best interest. And that's what the DNC hasn't done well enough, is done anything to try to win over people based on policy. They've only tried to win people over based on shaming them.
Yeah.
And over-investing in identity politics, like personal identity politics.
And being bullies with, being bullies to somebody who maybe uses a word that they find offensive, or uses a word they're like, hey, we don't really use that vernacular anymore. And then there's a way to do it with class distinction, and there's a way to do it as an asshole, an elitist asshole.
Right.
And that's where that I want to own the libs attitude comes from, is because they don't want these educated, college educated. A third of America's college educated has their bachelor's degrees. 2/3 do not.
Yeah.
And that is a very important dividing factor when it comes to not just the education, but the income.
Right.
And the well-offs, more the well-offs on the right, the majority of them voted for Trump, where the well-offs on the left, the coastal elites, the majority of them are going to vote, Democrat. But the identifier to me is twofold. One, rural or city. A rural area is not going to want a government with all these rules and regulations dictating what they should be doing every day. I get that. I get that argument.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you live in a city, you need to have a government that is going to take care of all these different human interactions. You need to take a third party to make sure people are being treated fairly, to make sure the food is healthy, like all these different things that make a city function. And when an entire party identifies themselves as the city party and another party identifies themselves as the rural party, there's always going to be clashing, right? Which is why the local government is so important in order to distinct itself what needs to happen between the city and the rural areas. My biggest frustration with rural voters is because somebody like a scientist is coming to tell you, hey, you need to put on a mask because this virus is killing people. And they prefer ignorance. They prefer to dive into their tribalism and into their religion, or cult of religion, if you will, of, no, I'm going to do what the politicians say, not what the doctors say. That's dangerous. To me, that's dangerous. And on the Democratic side is when they cancel people. And they're like, oh, that person is completely done. I mean, yeah, there need to be consequences if you say or do something stupid, sure. But let's try to build a bridge to help them come to the side of progress rather than cut them off forever and ostracize them. Max Brooks kind of put it this way on a show that I watched recently. There was a lot of insurgency in Germany after he won World War II, and they went out into the forests. And Mel Brooks, his job was to go hunt them. They were called werewolves. But instead to go hunt them all down, they just built up the town and fixed Germany. And eventually these people came out of the forest and they're like, hey, Fritz, I got a job for you. Come on.
Yeah.
It gave them a purpose.
Yeah, it's cancel culture is a really interesting topic to me, because on the one hand, I think that Harvey Weinstein is a monster and should rot in hell and should never be given a position of power. He can lord over people and abuse ever again. And I'm like, cool, cancel culture, great.
Well, it's just consequences for his depraved behavior.
Right.
So I think it's more than just saying something on Twitter. But go ahead.
So to me, I think cancel culture crosses a boundary when it's prescriptive about action. I think that cancel culture is great because it lets us use platforms like social media to point a lens towards somebody's transgressions. Like, cancel culture would be phenomenal if all it did was say, hey, everybody, look what this person did. And that was it. Because then everybody gets to make up their own mind about what they want the consequences to be, right? I think where cancel culture can get bad is, hey, everybody, look what so-and-so did, and here's why we should do X, Y, and Z to them. Because that lets you sort of weaponize the mob mentality, the torches and the pitchforks. I think that, are there monsters out there who need to be brought accountable for their actions? 100%. And I honestly haven't really... When people say, like, cancel culture sucks, I'm like, when, where, and why has it sucked? Like, show me an innocent person that did not deserve what they got from it, and people usually struggle there. If they can come up with an example of where cancel culture hurt, like, an innocent person, it's usually not actually, like, a cancel culture thing. I think as long as cancel culture is literally just saying, like, the problem pre-cancel culture, like let's go way pre-cancel culture. Let's go to the 1600s, 1700s. You could kill your kids, beat your wife, move 3 counties over. They'll never find you. There's no newspapers. There's no electricity. There's no telegrams, right? Like people were never held accountable to their actions. People could do whatever they want and just leave. Now it's like your actions are like, they are your actions in the society, and the society will find you and know about this. I think where it can tend to skew negative is when somebody's actions don't demand a blood sacrifice, and they're being held to this insane standard, right? I think everybody makes mistakes, and I think the content of your character and the people you surround you with usually insulate you from an overly strong immune system response against any negativity, right? Like a good friend of mine from high school recently came out as trans, and I knew them as their previous self, and they're now they identify as a different gender. I've tried super hard to make sure that I don't accidentally misgender them, and it's really tough because I knew them for this other gender as, you know, and this other name for 37 years, and now I'm like in one day. So, and I've occasionally slipped up in front of them or in front of mutual friends, but I immediately correct myself and I go out of my way to say, you know, sorry, you know, we've got this long history together. It's going to be really tough to never slip, and nobody cares. Nobody cares when I mess up.
Because it's reasonable. You're doing.
They're not like you're transphobic, but you are. But you're trying. You're trying to do good. And a lot of times, like I bring up like the trans thing because that's where a lot of cancel culture comes up. Is you'll hear a lot of people, specifically people from rural communities and sort of conservative backgrounds, they say, "Well, if I get it wrong, then I'm going to get canceled." And it's like, only if you're being shitty about it. Like if you're trying and people genuinely see that you're trying, nobody's going to care. And if you do happen to get like a trans person who you misgender and they've had a bad day and they take it out on you, like just know that that was probably one of 10,000 bad interactions they had with pieces of shit that week. And, you know, like, unfortunately, you just like try to put yourself in their shoes for a second, right? Like, ultimately, I don't have a huge problem with cancel culture because nobody can really present a ton of concrete evidence of like where it's gone off the rails and really ruined somebody that didn't deserve it. And I think ultimately all it really is just making sure that the consequences of somebody's actions, or making sure that knowledge of somebody's actions follow them, and letting people decide the consequences for themselves, right? Nobody said, hey, let's all throw Harvey Weinstein in jail. They said, hey, let's all talk about what Harvey Weinstein did. And unsurprisingly, he's getting thrown in jail. Right? Like it's really just a way of making sure that people can't escape those consequences, when up until now, most people have been able to escape those consequences.
That's a good point. You know, escaping consequences the rich and powerful have been able to do. But there's one scenario I'd like to present within this topic, and that's James Gunn. And this ties into the further nuance of what was Twitter 10 years ago. Twitter was for us gamers. Like, the president didn't use Twitter. News organizations didn't use Twitter. It was the best way for us to communicate outside of the game, right? Oh, follow me on Twitter, or what's your Twitter handle? Right. So James Gunn makes a couple off-color jokes, bad jokes on Twitter. He's not working for Disney. He's doing his own stuff years ago, right? Yeah. So then these tweets come out because the conservative right, the alt-right on the internet, are tired of James Gunn, you know, attacking the president or saying things. And so they bring up these tweets. Yeah. Then this massive mob on the right's like, oh, look at this hypocrite. He said terrible things about children and pedophilia back in the day on Twitter. He should be fired. And Disney capitulated. Right. But then Disney decided, okay, we're going to hire him back. Sure. That to me is an example of bowing to mob rule, where it should have been, can we sit down and talk about this in a nuanced context? But what are your thoughts on that?
So I remember when this story first happened, I think I even went back and I read the old tweets verbatim, tried to understand them in context a little bit better. Ultimately, I feel like the right will often try to weaponize cancel culture against liberal figures. Yes. Where liberals, when they try to use cancel culture, it's not necessarily to try to weaponize it against conservative folks. It's usually a little bit more genuine than that. You know, it's like, there's always this underpinning to a liberal figure getting caught in like a cancel culture thing, where the conservatives are like, oh, what are you going to do now, liberals? You're going to actually sacrifice your favorite goat? Yeah. And yes, we will. It reminds me a little bit of the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing blew up, and people are like, well, what are you going to do if they've got pictures of Bill Clinton? I'm like, I'm going to personally light the bonfire at his feet as we burn him at the stake.
Yeah, man, he went on that plane 26 times.
And then people were like,
So.
like Al Franken, it's a great example, right? Like here is a Democratic politician that had a questionable interaction with somebody while doing like a USO tour overseas, and the Democratic Party like burned him at the stake. They're like, sorry, you got to go. And he's like, yeah, that makes sense. We got to we got to talk the talk and walk the walk. And overwhelmingly, when conservatives are like, oh, here's this racist sheriff that we found in some southern county, and he got caught, like on Grindr, like with kiddie porn or something, the Christian conservative community will rally around him and be like, we got to pick him up and we got to help him walk through his sin, and we got to teach him how to. And I'm like, what? I like. For a group that tries to be so proscriptive about morality, I think that there's a big mismatch between that. To tie back to the James Gunn thing, overall, I feel like he was done a strong disservice, and it was a hit job by conservatives against just a loudmouth liberal, and they wanted to try to bring him down.
Yeah,
I don't think they actually really crossed a line insofar as, he luckily is a man who is well positioned to defend himself. He is articulate. He's smart. I think his statements that he released about it were fine. He was like, this is from an era where I was a, kind of a contrarian sort of like shock factor comedian that would just try to do like the dumbest kind of like grossest thing I could think of to say just for that value. And obviously I've come a long way since then. And I've shown personal growth since then, because obviously I haven't been making those kinds of jokes in 10 years.
Yeah.
I think that Disney capitulating to those folks was a safe corporate move for them. I don't know that it was the right thing, but I certainly don't fault them for saying, oh, wait, like knee-jerk reaction when there's a Twitter shitstorm about somebody you've hired and they made a pedophilia joke, like, oh, can him, done, instant. And then maybe you go sift through the wreckage later on and you say, you know what, you've done a phenomenal job with us. We can clearly see that maybe that decision was made a little too hastily to sort of appease a mob. We're going to slowly ease you back in. I think if you ask James Gunn, he'd be like, yeah, he's like, I wish that I hadn't made that. And I think that any sort of furor or uproar around those comments was well-deserved. And I think that Disney was right to can me. And, I'm not upset that they brought me back.
It's a very well-crafted, answer. And honestly, in the position of James Gunn, probably the best answer to have.
Yeah.
Because
I certainly don't want to defend the jokes that he made.
No, nobody should. But it's understanding what was Twitter back then. Right, how was Twitter weighted within the consciousness of humans?
Do I want to be judged by the worst thing I've ever typed in a video game, or the worst thing I've ever said on an open mic to teammates in Counter-Strike when I was a 17-year-old boy? God, no.
No. No.
But, I think if somebody tried to dredge something up from 2 decades ago and say, well, one time you said this, you called somebody gay once, and I'd be like, yeah, we all did when we were 17. The difference is when somebody pointed out to me that it was problematic, I changed. And that's it.
That's the difference. Yeah. That's the difference, and that's the beauty about having conversations and figuring it out. Because as somebody who used to be in a cult, if somebody would come to me like, what are you doing? What are you doing?
I was raised Catholic. I was in a cult too.
But it would further entrench. It would further entrench the people.
Sure.
It would further entrench you. And I think that's what has happened with the whole Trump cult, is that they keep fucking up and making mistakes, and we call them out on it. And they're like, oh, because you went to college. It's like, yes, there is truth that exists. There's a reality that exists. Yeah. And if you are going to further separate yourself from it, and I don't call you out, how do I help you? Right. And the vow, which is about Nixium, and the mom who had a daughter in that cult, all she kept doing was loving her and telling her, I remember you before you were in this cult, or I remember I had this memory and stuff. And eventually she's able to break out. But damn, it's frustrating, bro. It's frustrating because you just want to shake them and be no.
I've got a couple friends and family members who are Trumpers, and it's really tough to talk logic and reason. There's a great Vox article that came out a few years ago. It's called "How to Argue Better According to Science."
Go
look it up at some point. It's amazing. I suggest everybody give it a read. They talk about the fundamental differences in conservatives and liberals, for lack of better terms. I kind of don't love those terms.
Same.
But conservatives overwhelmingly accept appeals from emotion a little bit more naturally, and people who tend to skew more left, they tend to accept appeals from logic and reason. We like facts, we like numbers and statistics, and statistics has its own problem where you can sort of misconstrue data if you want. But they had this really revelatory moment where they talked about how they used gun control and gay marriage as sort of like the main metaphors within this article. And when you take an issue like gun control to a conservative, they always say, what's like the talking point when you try to say, we're going to take away guns? They always say, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, right? We've heard that a million times. And to them, they're like, that's super smart, that's super big brain. Like, how do they not understand that? It makes so much sense. That's the only thing that makes sense. And we're like, we have way more guns than everybody else, and we have way more shootings than everybody else. Look at our data. Hello, we're Democrats. This data is super compelling to us. And we're like, the data makes so much sense. Why don't you get the data? And we're like firing missiles at each other that are just not armed. Like, like good guy with the gun missiles just bounce off of Democrats because we're like, that's just a fucking that's a tautology. Like, that is just a hollow, meaningless argument, right? And the data bounces off of them because they're like, numbers don't mean anything. I only care about how I feel about the problem. And if you can arm yourself with the right ammunition, you can actually start to make inroads with folks. And that's where they sort of pivot to the gay marriage thing. They said they took a bunch of conservative voters who did not respond well to questions about legalizing gay marriage. And this was after the Supreme Court ruled that it was legal. They said, how do you feel about gay marriage? They're like, it's bad, it's dumb, I hate it. And then they said, okay. So they brought in some people who talked about how they had gay loved ones who had served in the armed forces and had died, and their spouses weren't able to claim their benefits because the rules are still really shitty around that stuff. And essentially, they did this Jedi mind trick where they said, if you don't support gay marriage, you don't support the troops. And these conservatives were like, oh, wait. Wait a second. Hell yeah, support the troops. They should be able to get those spousal benefits and stuff. And like immediately you took the thing they cared about and tied it to the thing you were trying to teach them. And they're like, oh, now it actually makes sense. So if you can do a little bit of homework, do some deep digging, and like talk to people and say, what do you actually care about? And drill down, because again, these progressive ballot measures are passing in states that voted deep, deep red for Donald Trump. We know that they care about certain things a lot, enough to show up and vote, but they also care about the progressive ideals that we care about, like, income inequality, all that stuff. All that being said, it's not super hard to say, conservatives, you love the Republican Party because they are for small government, right? Well, actually, the Democrats are too, if you think about it, because we don't want to tell people who or what they can smoke in the privacy of their own home. We don't want to say who or what, we don't want to tell you like who you can marry, right? Like the government shouldn't be involved in saying whether or not you can marry a man or a woman. The government shouldn't be involved in telling you whether or not you can smoke weed. The government shouldn't be involved in telling a woman what sort of healthcare decisions she makes between her and her doctor, right? Like really the Democrats are pretty small government when you think about it. Like the Republicans will oftentimes talk about states' rights, and it's usually a thinly veiled metaphor for racism and obstructing voting access for communities of color. But they say, oh, states' rights, states should be able to determine this. California for a super long time has acted as a de facto EPA, because if California passes a super restrictive emission regulation around new cars that can't be sold in California if the exhaust output is like this many parts per million. Because California buys 40% of the cars in this country, all auto manufacturers have to conform to California's standards. The Trump administration about 6 months ago passed a law saying that California couldn't set aggressive emissions regulations. And I was like, well, hang on, aren't you guys states' rights? Like, oh, you're only states' rights when it's closing abortion clinics. You're not states' rights when it's California trying to protect the environment. And it's like, I think that when you can sort of put these different ideas into somebody's head, they might start to think a little bit outside of that tribalist party affiliation and say, well, hang on a second. I do really like small government. And in a lot of ways, the Republican Party is being a lot more prescriptive and it is a lot more intrusive into people's lives than the Democratic Party is, at least on these issues. And a lot of young people, there's a lot of young Republicans out there that are like, why the hell does the Republican Party give a shit about gay marriage? Like, we're so over this. We are like, why are we even talking about this anymore? And they get really annoyed. So I think that there's definitely some opportunity to maybe sway people on issues and pull them across. I think we should just honestly start doing things by ballot measure, because all the things we want to pass, we can pass on a ballot. We might not be able to get them to vote blue, because that part of your lizard and monkey brain that's like, so like, oh, I have to vote for my tribe, might not ever vote Democrat, but they definitely might adopt Democratic policy positions.
There are 2 examples that I wanted to bring up. Well, this exact line of thinking, having conversations like this, is what pulled me out of my cult and what pulled me out of conservatism in a way that was very tied to religion, which unfortunately most conservatives are. Their feelings.
Yeah.
It's not based on facts.
No, it's an appeal to emotion.
It's an appeal to emotion, which is how religion gets you, and how this is tied into the evangelical Christian form of worship in the Western Hemisphere, tied to God wrote the Constitution. God wants us to have guns. This is the promised land so that we can reestablish Israel. I mean, that's the doctrine of the right in the religious closets of the world. So to have a conversation with people like that is difficult unless you do talk about their feelings. And one thing that changed me, having a conversation in college, a lot of people that I went to college with were gay, and it didn't bother me.
Right.
People that I have a cousin.
Did you have a moment where you were like, you realized you weren't bothered by it, and you were like, wait a minute, isn't this supposed to bother me?
Yeah, because I had a cousin, Kerry, who looks just like Donny Osmond. He grew up Mormon. Yeah. He was gay. And I remember when we met him and his boyfriend for a family reunion, the nicest fucking people ever. They gave my sisters Beanie Babies, which were like highly coveted at the time. Oh, yeah. And they were super chill to hang out with. And I'm going, wait a second.
Was I misled?
Yeah, if the church is telling me this is wrong, how come I feel so great around them, right? So that stuck with me as a kid. And then in college... in Kansas, not really exposed to a lot of people that swing a different way. But in college in Utah, you start to meet a lot of different people, sure, but they're kind of under the same realm. Then I went to college in Virginia, and I remember talking with my friend Topher during dinner one time. We were getting ready to do a show, and we were having this conversation. And he says, "Joshua, do you choose to like women?" And I thought about it. I go, no, I didn't make a choice and I just like women. Hell, if I could choose, I wouldn't like women because I can't find anybody like me, back then.
Yeah.
And he goes, I didn't choose to like men, but I just do. And it's like a bomb just blew up. I went, fuck.
I think the best
the
best thing anybody can do to challenge their own prejudices is leave their hometown,
Yep.
I think there's huge, and like, that's not me trying to be some cultural coastal elite that's like, oh, you got to go travel the world to meet all these people. Like, you have very limited experiences, and that like tied to your geographic location, right? Like, I grew up in New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire. It is one of the whitest states out there next to Vermont. We had I could count the POC families on one hand. I could count the Jewish families on one hand. Like, there was just not a lot of diversity where I grew up. And I don't think that I necessarily I don't think I ever felt while growing up that I had sort of like backwards mentalities about any of these things. But as soon as I traveled and moved around and lived in LA and lived in all these other cities, you can't, what's the saying? It's like, they say like daylight's the best antiseptic, right? It's just like, just shining a light on things can really open your mind and your horizons. And it's why people who only get their news from one news source are generally the most ill-informed. And I'm not saying abandon the news source you do watch and choose this one. I'm not trying to be prescriptive. I'm just saying watch 2, watch 3. Like, listen to NPR, watch Fox, check out MSNBC, read BBC, like, just try to get different opinions on things. I think the greatest failing of our education system was teaching people that the scientific process was just for doing experiments in a lab. The scientific process is the greatest invention mankind has ever made.
It's the age of reason. That's how we got the age of reason.
Form your hypothesis. You say, this is what I think is right, and then attack it and try to disprove it and get your friends to come over and try to replicate your experiments and try to question your findings and do everything within your power to disprove that. And if you can't, then you might have a good idea.
Ooh.
And that is so powerful. And but that should be taught not just in a science class, but that needs to be taught in politics. It needs to be taught in journalism. Like, here, I think, is one of the main differences between conservatives and progressives. Conservatives will hear a thing and they go, is that right? And then they go to Google and they go, is that right? It could be like, Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Clinton, or whatever. It could be a fact that they heard about the vote counting. And they go and they hear the thing and they go, that's fucked up. And then they go to Google and they say, is that thing I heard, is that true? And what progressives do, and it usually has to do with the fact that they've gotten more schooling or they absorbed it better, and like their deep analysis and critical thinking skills might be a little bit more advanced. And I'm not trying to be like derogatory in any way, but like
it's just that's what school is for, is to teach you how to learn in a way.
If I'm having a conversation and I uncover a fact and somebody's like, like I'm pretty pro gun control and I'm pretty anti Donald Trump, and somebody was like, well, after the Las Vegas shooting, Donald Trump passed a ban on bump stocks to try to make sure that something like the Las Vegas shooting can never happen again. And I was like, I was like, I'll go look that up because like I don't really care, right? Like I don't care who does a good thing. I just care that a good thing happened. And I was like, oh, look at that. He tried. And I think it passed and then got overturned or something. But I was like, that's awesome. That's awesome if Donald Trump did that. And the Trump appointee at the Department of the Interior recently just passed legislation that says all veteran families can get into national parks for free. I was like, that's dope. That's awesome. That's great. I don't care that Donald Trump did it. I think that's great. And I don't need to hate that, right? Mitt Romney basically passed the Affordable Care Act. He's governor of Massachusetts. And Republicans are like, this is sick. And then Obama's like, we're going to do it for the whole country. And they're like, fuck you, that's socialism. And I'm like, guys, I don't understand why you care who's doing the thing. Just listen to whether or not the thing is a good thing. It's not, it doesn't have to be this like hyper partisan thing. And like the ACA is not even good. Like it's a gutted version of what it should be. It doesn't nearly go far enough, but it's like, I always talk about how like the Affordable Care Act is basically don't ask, don't tell, right? Like gays can now openly serve. Gays can now openly serve in the military, and that's what should have been true the whole time. Sometimes, and like I think incrementalism is like the worst approach to politics, but sometimes you do need, for things that aren't palatable, you do need to sort of have that stopgap measure that gets us there eventually. I think don't ask, don't tell is extremely harmful. There's like plenty of record that like a lot of soldiers who actively served and it was don't ask, don't tell, like it was worse for them than just trying to stay closeted the whole time. Yeah. Because you're trying to lead this double life where you're like, I can be gay and not get kicked out. I just have to make sure nobody finds out. And it's like, that's essentially what we already had. Now it's just like worse consequences. The ACA is like a stepping stone to get towards, universal healthcare. I think that it's not great. It does a lot of financial harm to some families where you have to have care, otherwise you get the penalty, and it's like it's not great. But a lot of the places where it's not great, those are states that gutted the wrong parts of it. Yeah, they like voted against the federal subsidies, but they voted to have, and it's like, well, now you're just not getting federal money to support this program, and now of course your healthcare costs more. That was you did that. That's not their fault. Yeah.
It's a complicated process where it doesn't need to be, because we see different plans and different measures in different countries that work great.
Aim big. I don't like incrementalism, and that's what the DNC has been really just. They're such strange bedfellows. They say we want to get here, but we don't want to take a big step to get there
because the donors don't want them to. And this is the biggest frustration I currently have right now. I respect Nancy Pelosi for what she's done, but she should not be the leader of the House. She should not be the Speaker of the House, because she feels too disconnected to working families. When she has multiple flavors of ice cream in her freezer and she's talking about that rather than policies and substances, it's like, what are we doing? And I feel a change of leadership, and the voice of leadership should be Ilhan Omar or AOC or somebody from the squad that's young and vibrant and is going to push these ideas into something radical. But the fear that the DNC has, the older DNC, is that if they stray further away from the center, they're going to lose more votes and they're going to lose more power. And I feel we both feel it's the opposite. If they embrace the progressive policies, they are going to be a movement that nobody can stop.
I think, how a little bit earlier I talked about, how there's the ballot measures, right? Like the ballot measures show that even conservative voters are willing to vote progressive on ballot measures, specifically when they stand to benefit from them. Yeah, I think that a lot of the partisan reasons, the tribalist reasons that folks won't abandon party, like you can't vote blue if you're red. That's just not how this works. The folks that feel that strongly, like Donald Trump catalyzed a lot of non-political folks, right? Like a lot of people showed up to support Donald Trump that were not voters. They were like, they identified as Republican but didn't vote. They showed up in droves because he was an anti-establishment candidate. I think if we put up somebody from the squad, they will, like, AOC is an anti-establishment candidate. The DNC kind of doesn't like her, right? And that's been pretty evident. I mean, when Debbie Wasserman Schultz torpedoed Bernie Sanders, like, we understand that the progressive ideals of democratic socialism, small s, not big S, not communism, don't freak out. The progressive ideals of democratic socialism seem anathema to the party, but they are winning ballot measures by presidential margins in red states.
Yep.
The DNC would do so well if they adopted a more leftist platform. It's like, I don't know how to explain that any differently in a way that doesn't frighten the DNC or frighten conservative voters. Like, there's people out there that are worried. They're like, oh, Joe Biden is Bernie Sanders in wolf's clothing. It's like, are you insane?
Yeah, that's such a ridiculous
Bernie
argument.
Sanders is the most neo-lib, milquetoast central that, like, if I had found a way to safely vote for Joe Biden twice, I would not have, because I'm that unexcited to vote for him. Like, if I knew I could have cast 2 votes and not gotten caught, I still only would have cast 1 vote for him, because he's not that exciting, and he's a centrist, and he always has been, and that's fine if that's what you want. But if we want progress, and I think the DNC wants progress, but they're so scared to go after big progress, they think this incrementalist approach is the only way to do it. But without going too deep into, like, Overton window philosophy, we've been getting dragged kicking and screaming to the right for decades by the right, who is just, they continually running full sprint as far as they can to the right, and the DNC are trying to, like, claw back a little bit of territory. Like, we're trying to go west, and we just boarded the slower of the 2 trains, but they're both heading east, and it's not the right direction.
Yeah. Amen, brother. It's they have to look at the facts and not their feelings.
Yeah.
At the DNC, they got to go by the facts, and the facts are our generation is hurting, and we need sweeping new legislation, not only to lift us up where we are, but for the sake of the planet.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know if you saw that AOC tweet. She pointed out that every single swing state House Democrat that ran in support for Medicare for All won re-election. Every swing state House Democrat that was not for Medicare for All lost their election. And it skews even worse for which states are blue and red. If you were a swing state House Democrat in a red state and you ran in support of Medicare for All, you won by a wider margin than those that ran in blue states.
Yeah, it's right there. It's right there in front of us.
Because conservative voters are still willing to vote in their own best interest.
Yeah, it's right there in front of us.
On the ballot. They just won't cross party lines.
Yeah. Ballot measures, man. Well, we can vote way better. I mean, if we can bank online, we can vote online.
Oh, 100%.
There's just so many things that we can be doing better.
You know what? Like, one of my favorite weird little idiosyncrasies of conservative arguments is that we can't vote through the mail because the mail's not secure, and you need to show your ID, and you get your ID through the mail.
Or how does the military vote? Through the mail.
Through the mail.
So if you want to stop mail-in ballots, you don't support the troops.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other thing too, the argument that I like to make with the conservatives is, do you want to be fiscally conservative? Yes. Then universal health care is the cheapest.
The CBO has done the Congressional Budget Office has done the number crunch on universal health care, and it's so much cheaper.
It's going to save everybody money. Every American will save money.
Yeah.
Every single American. They go, oh, your taxes are going to get higher. Yes, but your overall amount of money leaving your pocket every month is going to be lower. And Bernie Sanders explained that in front of that Fox group. He's explained it every single time in clear, concise, consistent language.
There's so much nuance to a lot of these financial issues. Like, I don't know enough about macroeconomics to understand. I can't read a CBO report, you know? I could. I would not get a lot. I'm a simple man that likes my video games, MMO, and my bank's closed. That's a weird Simpsons reference. There's
deep cuts.
There's so little understanding of even, like, barely nuanced issues, right? Like, you still hear people that are like, oh, if I make $1,000 more this year, I end up in a higher tax bracket, so I'll make less money. And they don't understand that, like, you only get taxed the new bracket on what you make above the old point. You know, like, if, let's say arbitrarily, if you went from 25 to 50% taxes, which is insane, at $100,000, and you're currently making 99, you're like, well, I don't want to make $101,000 because then I'm going to get taxed 50%. I'll lose, close to 50 grand. It's like, no, you only get taxed the extra 25% on everything above. Like, that's how tax brackets work. And people don't even understand that, like, which is a super easy concept to understand. But like, I've heard business owners, like people who own their business and they have 50 employees on payroll, and they don't understand how tax brackets work. And I'm just like, what? Then why do you feel compelled to talk about things like Medicare for all is going to cost more money. I was like, you don't understand your own business finances. Why do you think that you know how this would work? And that's why you look at what the CBO says, because they are professionals that are super smart and they crunch these numbers and they're totally bipartisan. They will tell you exactly what the economic and fiscal impacts of these programs are going to be. It's like, it blows my mind, man.
It's crazy. Well, Shaun, I wanted to ask you before we wrap up here, how's everything going at Wizards of the Coast? Is there any current projects you're working on or anything that's kind of filling your days? And you're still working from home, I assume?
Yeah, we're working from home. Wizards of the Coast takes the pandemic super seriously. We all went like fully work from home. There's a few people that are in the office. There's a lot of like artists that have like big drafting things. They can't really move.
Yeah.
Wizards was super cool. They gave us a lot of concessions. They gave us a stipend to modify our home workspaces, knowing that we'd have to be there for a little while. They've been super cool about this. We had a pretty meeting heavy internal culture there. That's still true, just on Zoom and stuff. I am super happy on all the projects I'm working on. There's just been a ton of support from everybody internally at Wizards of the Coast. I'm a huge Magic and D&D fan. I have been since I could, shuffle cards and roll dice.
Nice.
My older brother got me into both of those games. Projects I'm currently working on. We've just got, there's a lot of cool stuff in the pipe at Wizards. Always. I can't talk too much about specifics. As obviously as a big esports video game guy, I've been loving the ability for Magic Arena, which is our newest digital expression of Magic. It's let people play Magic when they're not allowed to sit down at a table and shuffle up, which is great. We've seen just people in general are very excited that there are tools at their disposal. We have a new product that we acquired a platform called Spell Table, which lets people play physical Magic cards with like a webcam pointed straight down. It's like a little matchmaking service.
Wow.
So you can kind of play different formats against each other.
Spell Table, that's cool.
Super awesome. And yeah, it's our games fundamentally are about connecting with each other and playing. I'm so used to playing D&D at a table with all my friends. I'm so used to playing Magic at a table with all my friends. COVID has really restricted the ability to do that. We're trying to do what we can. I'm not sure how familiar you are with like our we have this thing called the WPN, the Wizards Partner Network, which is like it's a network of game stores that have sort of gone above and beyond to sort of prove that they're trying to make better spaces for gamers overall. We work with the WPN stores in our network. We rolled out some programs that let the WPN store stay afloat when there's less foot traffic in and out of the door. So we're doing what we can to help people out in this time. It's overall it's a great place to work.
Right on.
And they've treated us really well throughout this whole thing.
Do you think company culture's gonna change after things get back to normal? Do you think you're gonna go back to the office as often, or are more people gonna feel comfortable staying at home, or are you gonna hybrid it? Do you think?
I think that we will, and these are just my personal expressions. And
sure,
none of these
doesn't reflect the company. It's just Shaun and I having a conversation.
I think Wizards is taking. I think they're going to build back better, to borrow the phrase a lot of people are talking about.
Okay.
I think that where it makes sense, people who don't need to be in the office constantly might not be. I think fundamentally we're a very collaborative company, sometimes almost to a fault, but like it's just people are so excited and they have so much passion for what we do that everybody wants to sort of run up the flagpole, sort of get like commiseration from other people. Like even if you work on D&D, you might be like, hey, I am in a campaign with those guys in the Magic team. We should see what they think about this change. And people just tend to reach across different departments a lot. And so I think a lot of us are really chomping at the bit to get back into the office because we do just collaborate a lot better in person. Meetings are a lot more effective when you can read body language and tone a little bit better.
Yep.
I don't think we're going to be one of those companies that's like, everybody work from home forever. I think we do all want to get back in the office because it is such a creative environment. But I think that it's going to be done in a smart, science-based way once we do go back.
Yeah, that's one of the paradigm shifts I'm looking forward to seeing, at least as an observer, because bars aren't opening anytime soon. So that's always just kind of looking on the outside going, all right, I got to dust up my resume and see what's going to land here at the new year. But very, very fascinating to see how much has changed within our career lifetime over the last 10 years and to see what the next 10 years has in store. It's going to be a fun time, hopefully, if our country gets our stuff together. Yeah. Where can people find you online, Shaun?
I'm mostly available on Twitter at It's Zero Love. That's ITSZEROLOVE. and that's basically it. I stream on Twitch occasionally, but it's usually weird stuff. I let Twitch chat control a robot that cut my hair. We raised like $3,000 for charity. That was wild, but the streams are pretty few and far between. And other than that, you can find me playing a warrior horde side on Thrall in about 1 hour.
That's right. We got to get you out of here so you can get some World of Warcraft in. Well, thanks again, man.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Thank you for being such a treasured friend as well.
Of course.
Moving up here, be like, I got my parents, and then you and Alex and others moved up here. I'm like, all right, cool. We got a little gang going. But unfortunately,
Seattle squad.
It's great.
Yeah.
I like the Seattle squad. Hopefully, we can squad up a lot more often.
We got Doug up here now too.
He's
Doug Redden. Yeah.
He just hit 1 million subscribers on YouTube, bro.
I know, it's wild.
That's crazy. I watched one of his videos where he just was making cookies and bears were attacking villagers in the middle of Skyrim. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Well done, Doug. So I hope to get him on the podcast one of these days.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Cool. Well, thanks again, man.
My pleasure.
Pleasure as always. All right, folks. Thank you for tuning in. You can follow me on all the social media, Mr. Joshua Gray. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.